The rancher stood frozen as the wagon door opened. But the woman stepping into the mud wasn't the bride he'd paid for. Beautiful Sienna Blackwell was supposed to change his fortune. Instead, her plain, exhausted sister Eliza stumbled out, clearly sent as a replacement nobody wanted. The entire town would laugh. His ranch hands already were. One look at her trembling hands told him she wouldn't survive a week on the brutal Missouri frontier. He should have sent her back immediately. But something in her desperate eyes stopped him. And that single moment of hesitation would ignite a war that nearly destroyed everything he'd built. Stay with me until the end of this story, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale travels. The February wind cut across the Missouri plains like broken glass, ripping through Cade Mercer's coat as he stood outside the main ranch house, watching the wagon approach. His breath came out in white clouds. Around him, 5 ranch hands had stopped working to stare at the road, their faces showing the same curiosity that had been building for weeks. "That's her?" Tommy Briggs asked, leaning on his shovel. At 19, he was the youngest of the crew, still fool enough to believe every woman was beautiful until proven otherwise. "Better be," Cade said. "Cost me enough to get her here." The arrangement had been simple. Cade needed a wife. His ranch needed a woman's presence, someone to manage the house, handle the books, bring some civilization to this patch of frozen hell. Sienna Blackwell's father had written elegant letters describing his daughter's accomplishments. Educated in St. Louis, skilled at piano, admired by every eligible man in 3 counties. The photograph showed a striking woman with dark hair and confident eyes. Cade hadn't cared much about beauty. He needed competence, someone who wouldn't collapse at the first sign of hardship. The frontier ate weak people alive, and he'd buried enough dreams in Missouri soil to know better than to expect softness to survive. But he'd be lying if he said he hadn't looked at those photographs more than necessary. The wagon pulled to a stop 20 feet from where he stood. The driver, a weathered man named Carlson who ran freight between Kansas City and the frontier settlements, climbed down without meeting Cade's eyes. That was the first warning. "Afternoon, Mercer," Carlson said, his voice careful. "Carlson?" Cade nodded. "Everything go smoothly?" "Smooth as it could." Carlson walked to the back of the wagon, still not looking at him. "Though I should mention—" The door opened. A woman stepped down into the February mud, and Cade's stomach dropped. This wasn't Sienna Blackwell. The woman standing before him was shorter than the photographs had suggested, thinner, with light brown hair pulled back in a braid that was coming apart. Her dress was simple gray wool, wrinkled from travel. Her face was pale, exhausted, and carried none of the confidence he'd seen in those carefully posed pictures. She looked at him for exactly 2 seconds before her gaze dropped to the ground. Behind Cade, someone laughed. "That's her?" Tommy said again, but this time the question carried a different weight entirely. Cade felt heat rising in his chest. Not attraction, not welcome, but anger. Pure, simple anger at being deceived. He'd paid good money for this arrangement. He'd waited 3 months. He'd prepared the house, cleared space in his life for someone who could handle frontier existence. And they'd sent him this? "What's your name?" he asked, his voice harder than he intended. The woman flinched. "Eliza Blackwell." Blackwell. He stepped closer, studying her face. There was a resemblance, something in the shape of her eyes, the line of her jaw. "You're related to Sienna, her sister." Eliza's voice was quiet, barely audible over the wind. "Younger sister." "Where is she?" Eliza's hands twisted together in front of her. "She married Thomas Wickham 2 weeks ago. They're in St. Louis." The ranch hands had stopped pretending to work entirely now. All 5 of them stood watching the disaster unfold. Cade could feel their judgment, their amusement, their pity. By nightfall, every ranch within 30 miles would know. Cade Mercer, the man who couldn't even get the right woman delivered. "So they sent you instead," Cade said. "Yes." "And you agreed to this?" Eliza's jaw tightened, the first sign of anything resembling backbone. "I wasn't asked. I was told to get in the wagon." Carlson cleared his throat. "The father paid me to bring her. Said the arrangement stood either way. He figured you needed a wife, and he needed—" The freight driver trailed off, glancing at Eliza with something close to sympathy. "Well, he needed to settle his accounts." "Settle his accounts," Cade repeated. He looked at Eliza again, really looked at her. She stood perfectly still, shoulders hunched against the cold, eyes fixed on the mud. She looked like she expected to be struck, or worse, thrown back in the wagon and shipped somewhere else. The anger in his chest shifted into something more complicated. Behind him, one of the older ranch hands, a gray-bearded man named Sullivan, spoke up. "Boss, maybe we should get back to work," Cade said. Sullivan hesitated. "It's nearly dark." "Then work until it is dark." The men scattered, but slowly. They'd talk about this for weeks, months probably. The story would grow with each telling until Cade became the fool who got swindled by a clever father and a plain daughter nobody else wanted. Carlson pulled Eliza's trunk from the wagon. It was small, battered, and looked like it had traveled farther than just from St. Louis. "I'll leave this here," he said. "You folks sort out the rest." "You're not staying?" Eliza asked, and for the first time Cade heard real fear in her voice. "Got another delivery in Westport," Carlson said. He looked at Cade, then at Eliza, then back at Cade. "Good luck to both of you." The wagon pulled away, wheels cutting through frozen mud, leaving them alone in the fading afternoon light. Eliza stood beside her trunk, shivering. She wasn't dressed properly for Missouri winter. Her coat was too thin, her boots insufficient. Her hands were already red from cold. Cade made a decision he'd probably regret. "Can you cook?" he asked. She looked up, surprised by the question. "Yes." "Can you clean?" "Yes." "Can you handle basic accounts? Read and write?" "I managed my father's books for 6 years." Cade nodded slowly. "Here's what's going to happen. You'll stay in the house tonight. Sleep in the guest room upstairs. Tomorrow morning, you'll make breakfast for 7 men. If you can do that without poisoning anyone, we'll discuss what comes next." "You're not sending me back? Where would I send you?" Cade gestured at the empty plains surrounding them. "Your father clearly doesn't want you. I'm not throwing a woman into the wilderness to freeze, but don't mistake this for charity. You'll work. You'll earn your place. And if you can't handle it," he stopped himself. "We'll deal with that if it happens." Eliza picked up her trunk. It was clearly heavy, but she lifted it without asking for help. "Where's the guest room?" "Inside, second door on the left." She walked past him toward the house, struggling with the weight, but refusing to set it down. Cade watched her go, then turned to survey his ranch. In the distance, his men were already gossiping. Tommy was gesturing wildly, probably describing Eliza's appearance with all the cruelty 19-year-old boys could muster. This was going to be a disaster. He was sure of it. The house smelled like old smoke and older loneliness. Eliza stood in the guest room, staring at the narrow bed and single window. The room was clean enough, someone had swept recently, but it felt temporary. A place to put things you didn't want cluttering the important spaces. She'd spent her whole life in rooms like this. Her trunk sat on the floor where she'd dropped it. She should unpack, put her few belongings in the dresser, hang her other dress. Try to make this space feel less like a cell. But exhaustion pulled at her bones. The journey from St. Louis had taken 11 days. 11 days of rough roads, terrible food, and Carlson's uncomfortable silence. He'd known. The whole time he'd known he was delivering the wrong woman. Eliza walked to the window and looked out at the ranch. In the fading light, she could see the outline of barns, fences, and what looked like a bunkhouse. Men moved between buildings, their voices carrying on the wind. She couldn't make out words, but she didn't need to. She knew what they were saying. "That's her? That's what he got instead?" She'd heard variations of that her entire life. Sienna was the beautiful one. Sienna was the charming one. Sienna was the daughter their father actually loved. Eliza was present, useful when needed, invisible when not. When their mother had died giving birth to Eliza, something in their father had broken. He'd looked at his baby daughter and seen only the thing that took his wife away. For 23 years, he'd never quite forgiven her for surviving. 2 weeks ago, he'd called her into his study. "Sienna's marrying Thomas Wickham," he'd announced without preamble. "The wedding is tomorrow." Eliza had nodded, unsurprised. Thomas was wealthy, educated, from a good family. Exactly the match her father had wanted for his favorite daughter. "There's another matter," her father continued. "I'd arranged for Sienna to marry a rancher in Missouri, a man named Cade Mercer. Paid good money for the introduction, the photographs, all of it." He'd shuffled papers on his desk. "Obviously, that arrangement is now void." "Obviously," Eliza had agreed. Except I already took his money and made certain promises. Her father had finally looked at her then, his eyes cold and calculating. You'll take her place. The words had hit her like a fist. What? You'll go to Missouri, marry the rancher, fulfill the contract. Father, I can't. You can and you will. His voice had turned sharp. I've supported you for 23 years, Eliza. Fed you, clothed you, kept a roof over your head. This is how you repay that debt. By marrying a stranger? By being useful for once in your worthless life. The words shouldn't have hurt anymore. She'd heard worse from him over the years, but somehow they still cut deep. What if he refuses? She'd asked quietly. Her father had smiled, a thin, cruel expression. Then you'll figure something else out. You've always been resourceful when it came to surviving where you weren't wanted. That had been the end of the discussion. Now, standing in a stranger's house on a frozen Missouri ranch, Eliza understood the full weight of her father's plan. He'd sent her here expecting her to fail, expecting Cade Mercer to take one look at the wrong sister and send her packing. Then her father could wash his hands of both obligations, the money and the daughter. But Cade hadn't sent her away. He told her to stay the night, make breakfast, prove she could work. It wasn't kindness. She recognized that much. It was pragmatism. He needed help, and she was here. That was all. But it was more than she'd expected. A knock on the door startled her. Yes? She called. The door opened slightly, and an older woman peered in. She was perhaps 60, with gray hair pulled into a tight bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. I'm Mrs. Garrett, she said. I come 3 times a week to cook and clean. Kate asked me to bring you some things. She entered carrying blankets and what looked like warmer clothes. These were his wife's, Mrs. Garrett said, setting them on the bed. She died 4 years back. Pneumonia took her in the winter of '58. He never got rid of her things, but he won't mind if you use them. You're half frozen already. Eliza stared at the clothes. He was married before. For 3 years. Rebecca was a good woman, strong. She loved this place. Mrs. Garrett's expression softened slightly. You're not what he expected. I know. The men are already talking. I know that too. Mrs. Garrett studied her for a long moment. Can you actually cook, or was that a lie? I can cook. Good. Because 7 ranch hands eat like starving wolves. If you poison them, they'll never let you forget it. If you feed them well, they might stop laughing long enough to give you a chance. What should I make? Biscuits, bacon, eggs, gravy, coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. Anything less and they'll tear you apart. Mrs. Garrett moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Cade's not cruel, but he's not soft either. This ranch nearly killed him a dozen times over. He doesn't have patience for weakness. I'm not weak, Eliza said quietly. Then prove it. Mrs. Garrett left, closing the door behind her. Eliza sat on the bed, surrounded by a dead woman's clothes and a stranger's low expectations. Outside, the wind howled against the house. Somewhere in the darkness, men were laughing at her expense. She should be terrified. Instead, she felt something else entirely, something she hadn't felt in years. Anger. Not at Cade, not at the ranch hands, not even at her father. At herself. For 23 years, she'd accepted being unwanted. She'd made herself small, quiet, invisible. She'd apologized for existing in spaces where she wasn't welcome. She'd let her father treat her like a burden and her sister ignore her like furniture. And it had gotten her exactly nowhere. She was still the woman nobody chose. Still the mistake sent in place of someone better. Still fighting for scraps of respect from people who'd already decided she didn't matter. But maybe, just maybe, that could change. Not because Cade Mercer would fall in love with her. Not because the ranch hands would suddenly see her value, but because she could prove to herself that she was more than the role her father had cast her in. She could survive this. She could work harder than anyone expected. She could make herself necessary, competent, irreplaceable. And when they tried to send her away, because they would eventually try, she'd make them regret underestimating her. Eliza stood and began unpacking her trunk. She had work to do. 4 o'clock in the morning came like a slap. Eliza woke in darkness, disoriented and cold. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory crashed back. Missouri, the ranch, her father's betrayal. Cade Mercer's Reluctant Mercy, breakfast for 7 men. She dressed quickly in the warmer clothes Mrs. Garrett had left. They fit reasonably well, though the sleeves were too long. Rebecca Mercer must have been taller. Eliza rolled them up and headed downstairs. The kitchen was larger than she'd expected, with a massive iron stove that radiated blessed heat. Someone, probably Mrs. Garrett, had left supplies on the counter: flour, bacon, eggs, coffee. A note in neat handwriting read, "Pantry is stocked. Don't burn my kitchen down." Eliza lit the lamps and got to work. She'd been cooking since she was 12 years old. After their mother died and Sienna proved useless in the kitchen, the responsibility had fallen to Eliza. She'd learned to make basic meals stretched to feed their household, to coax flavor from cheap ingredients, to time everything so it all finished hot and ready at once. But this was different. This was her audition. She mixed biscuit dough with practiced efficiency, shaped them quickly, and slid them into the oven. While they baked, she fried bacon until it was crispy but not burnt, scrambled eggs with cream, and made gravy thick enough to satisfy working men. The coffee she made strong enough to remove paint. By 6 o'clock, the kitchen smelled like a proper breakfast. By 6:15, she heard boots on the porch. The door opened and the ranch hands filed in. They stopped when they saw the table, laden with food, plates set, coffee steaming. Their expressions ranged from surprise to suspicion. Cade entered last. He looked at the spread, then at Eliza. "You made all this?" "Yes." "In the dark?" "I had lamps." One of the younger men, the one who'd laughed yesterday, reached for a biscuit. Eliza watched him take a bite, saw his eyes widen slightly. "These are good," he said, sounding almost offended by the fact. The other sat and began eating. For several minutes, the only sounds were forks on plates and appreciative chewing. Eliza stood by the stove, uncertain whether she should join them or wait. Cade made the decision for her. "Sit down. You cooked it, you eat it." She took the empty chair at the far end of the table. Someone passed her the bacon. The biscuits disappeared fast enough that she only got one for herself. "So," Sullivan said, looking at her with less hostility than yesterday. "You can cook." "I can cook." "What else can you do?" "Clean, mend, keep books, basic carpentry if needed. I'm good with numbers." Tommy snorted. "Can you ride?" "No." "Can you shoot?" "No." "Then what good are you on a ranch?" "Tommy," Cade said quietly, and the younger man shut his mouth. But the question hung in the air anyway. Eliza set down her fork. "I'm good at learning. I'm good at not complaining. And I'm good at making myself useful in ways that matter. If riding and shooting are what this place needs, I'll learn them. If something else is more important, I'll do that instead. And if Cade decides you're not worth the trouble," Tommy pushed, "then I'll deal with that when it happens." Sullivan laughed, a short, surprised bark. "She's got spine. I'll give her that." The meal continued. As the men finished eating, they brought their plates to the washing basin without being asked, clearly a house rule Rebecca Mercer had established. Eliza started cleaning up, and to her surprise, Sullivan stayed to help dry. "Don't mind Tommy," he said quietly. "Boy's got no filter." "I've dealt with worse." "I believe that." Sullivan handed her a dried plate. "But fair warning, but he's the least of your problems." "What do you mean?" "This ranch runs on respect. The men respect Cade because he works harder than any of them. He expects the same from everyone else. If you can't pull your weight, I can pull my weight. Then you'll do fine." He hung up the towel. "But understand something. We're not playing house here. This isn't some St. Louis parlor where you arrange flowers and pour tea. Winter here kills people. Accidents kill people. Stupidity kills people fastest of all. If you can't handle that—" "I can handle it," Eliza said firmly. Sullivan studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll see." The men left for morning chores. Cade lingered by the door. "That was acceptable," he said. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." He pulled on his coat. "This afternoon you'll ride out with me to check the north fence line." Eliza's stomach dropped. "I told you I can't ride." "Then you'll learn. Can't run a ranch from the kitchen." "I'll fall off." "Probably." Cade opened the door, letting in a blast of cold air. "But you'll get back on. That's the job." He left before she could argue. Eliza stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by dirty dishes and the fading warmth of the stove. Outside, she could hear the men working, voices calling to each other, horses whinnying, the sound of hammers on wood. She looked at her hands. They were soft, uncalloused, useless for the kind of work this place demanded, but they wouldn't stay that way for long. The horse was a demon sent specifically to humiliate her. Its name was Copper, and it was supposedly the gentlest horse on the ranch. It stood perfectly still while Cade showed her how to mount, how to hold the reins, how to sit properly in the saddle. Then the moment Cade turned his back, the damn thing started walking. "Stop," Eliza said. Copper ignored her. "Please stop." The horse continued moving, heading toward the open field with what felt like deliberate malice. Cade rode up beside her on a massive gray gelding. "Pull the reins gently." "I am pulling the reins." Gently means with control, not panic. "I'm not panicking." "Your knuckles are white." Eliza forced herself to loosen her grip. Copper, sensing the change, finally slowed and stopped. She sat in the saddle feeling triumphant for approximately 3 seconds before Cade said, "Now turn him around." The next hour was a special kind of torture. Copper didn't buck or bolt. Cade had been honest about the horse being gentle, but it tested her constantly. It would stop for no reason, start without warning, and drift toward grass whenever she wasn't paying attention. By the time they actually reached the north fence line, Eliza's legs ached and her pride was in tatters. But she hadn't fallen off. Cade dismounted and inspected the fence. Several posts were loose, and the wire needed tightening. He pulled tools from his saddlebag and got to work. Eliza watched him, unsure what to do with herself. She dismounted carefully, more like sliding down the side of the horse than anything graceful, and now stood holding Copper's reins while Cade hammered posts back into frozen ground. "Hand me the wire cutters," he said without looking up. She found them in the bag and brought them over. He took them, cut a section of wire, and began restringing the fence. His movements were efficient, practiced, the work of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "How long have you owned this ranch?" she asked. 7 years. Bought it with money from the California gold fields." "You were a miner?" "For 3 years. He drove a staple into wood with 3 sharp strikes. Made enough to buy land and get out before the work killed me." "And you built all this yourself?" "Rebecca and I built it together." He moved to the next post. She was better with the business side. I was better with cattle. We made it work. Eliza hesitated. "Mrs. Garrett said she died 4 years ago." "Yes." "I'm sorry." Cade paused, looking at her directly for the first time since they'd started working. "Are you?" The question caught her off guard. "Of course. Most people say that without meaning it. It's just something you're supposed to say." "I know what it's like to lose people," Eliza said quietly. "My mother died when I was born. I never knew her, but I've spent my whole life living in the space she left behind." Cade studied her face, then returned to his work. They continued in silence, but it felt different now, less hostile, more tolerable. By the time they rode back, afternoon light was fading. Eliza's entire body hurt. Her thighs screamed from gripping the saddle. Her back ached from the unfamiliar posture, and her hands were raw from holding the reins. But she'd ridden to the fence line and back without complaint. As they reached the barn, Tommy was mucking out stalls. He looked up as they approached, his eyes going to Eliza with obvious surprise. "She actually stayed on the horse?" "She did," Cade said. "Huh." Tommy leaned on his shovel. "Didn't expect that." Eliza dismounted, less gracefully than before, if that was possible, and led Copper into the barn. She'd watched Cade unsaddle his horse, so she tried to copy his movements. The saddle was heavier than it looked, and she nearly dropped it twice. Tommy appeared beside her. "Here," he said, not unkindly. "You got to lift from the horn and the cantle at the same time." He showed her the proper technique. Together they got the saddle off Copper and onto the rack. "Thanks," Eliza said. Tommy shrugged. "You lasted longer than I thought you would. Most city girls would have cried and demanded to go home by now." "I'm not most city girls." "Yeah." He grabbed a brush and started working on Copper's coat. "I'm starting to see that." 3 weeks passed in a blur of brutal work and small victories. Eliza learned to ride well enough that Copper stopped testing her constantly. She learned to shoot, not accurately, but enough to hit a target at 20 yards. She learned the names of all the cattle breeds, the proper way to mend a fence, and how to spot signs of illness in livestock. The ranch hands stopped laughing. It happened gradually. First, they stopped making jokes when she entered a room. Then they started including her in conversations. Sullivan taught her to play cards. Tommy showed her how to properly throw a rope. Even the quietest of the crew, a man named Chen, who rarely spoke to anyone, nodded to her respectfully when they passed. Cade watched it all without comment. Their interactions remained professional, almost formal. He'd assign her tasks, she'd complete them. He'd ask questions about the household accounts, she'd provide detailed answers. They shared meals in relative silence, but sometimes Eliza would catch him looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. It wasn't attraction, she'd given up expecting that from anyone. But it wasn't indifference either, it was something closer to reassessment, like he was seeing her differently than he had that first day. Then everything changed on a Thursday night in late February. Eliza was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard shouting outside. She ran to the window and saw Cade and Tommy arguing near the barn. Their voices carried on the wind. "Told you to check the south gate." "I did check it. It was latched." "Then how did 20 head of cattle get out?" Eliza grabbed her coat and ran outside. Other ranch hands were already gathering, faces tight with worry. Loose cattle in winter was a disaster. They could freeze, get injured, or wander so far they'd never be found. "What happened?" she asked Sullivan. "Someone left the south gate open, cattle scattered into the hills." "Can we find them? In the dark? In this cold?" He shook his head. "We'll lose most of them." Cade was already saddling his horse. "I'll take the east trail. Sullivan, you take west. Tommy, north. Chen, stay here and watch the rest of the herd." "I'll come with you," Eliza said. Every man turned to stare at her. "Absolutely not," Cade said. "You need everyone you can get. You can barely ride in daylight. In the dark, in the hills, you'll get yourself killed. Then teach me what to look for, and I'll search on foot." "Eliza, those cattle are worth money. This ranch needs that money. I'm not standing here doing nothing while you lose everything because you're too stubborn to accept help." The other men looked at Cade, waiting for his response. He stared at her for a long moment, jaw tight. Then he made a decision that would change everything. "Fine. You ride with me. Stay close, do exactly what I say, and if I tell you to go back, you go back. Understood?" "Understood." They rode out into the frozen darkness, following the tracks of scattered cattle. The temperature dropped viciously. Eliza's face went numb within minutes. But she kept pace with Cade, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. An hour in, they found the first group. 6 cattle huddled together against the wind. Cade guided them back toward the main trail while Eliza kept watch for stragglers. Then they heard it. A cow bawling in distress, somewhere deeper in the hills. "That's one of the pregnant heifers," Cade said. "Damn it!" They found her stuck in a ravine, thrashing and panicked. Getting down to her meant navigating treacherous terrain in near total darkness. "Wait here," Cade said. "What are you going to do?" "Get her out." "By yourself? She weighs 800 pounds. "I don't have a choice." Eliza dismounted. "Yes, you do." They worked together, Cade below in the ravine, Eliza above with the rope. It took 45 minutes of exhausting, freezing effort. The heifer fought them the entire time, terrified and in pain. Twice Eliza nearly lost her grip on the rope. Her hands bled from the friction, her muscles screamed, but she didn't let go. Finally, they got the heifer back on solid ground. Cade climbed up beside her, breathing hard. "You should have gone back when I told you to. Probably. You could have been hurt. So could you." He looked at her then, really looked at her. And something in his expression shifted. The formality cracked, just slightly, revealing something underneath that might have been respect. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's get these animals home." They made it back to the ranch at 3 in the morning. The other men had found most of the scattered cattle. They'd lost 4 to the cold, but saved the rest. Sullivan helped Eliza down from her horse. "You all right?" "Fine," she lied. "Everything hurt. You did good tonight." "We all did." "No." He looked at her seriously. "You could have stayed inside where it was warm. Nobody would have blamed you. But you rode out into a goddamn February night to save cattle most women wouldn't even touch. That matters." Kate approached, leading both horses toward the barn. Eliza. She turned. Thank you, he said simply. It was the first time he'd thanked her for anything. She nodded, too exhausted for words, and headed inside. Behind her, she heard Tommy say to the other men, I'll be damned. Maybe she actually belongs here. In the darkness of the guest room, Eliza collapsed onto the bed without bothering to undress. Her hands were raw and bleeding. Her body felt like it had been broken and poorly reassembled. But for the first time since arriving in Missouri, she let herself feel something dangerous. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could survive this place after all. The morning after the cattle rescue, Eliza woke to find her hands had swollen during the night. The rope burns had turned into blisters that made even holding a coffee cup painful. She wrapped them in clean cloth and went downstairs anyway. Mrs. Garrett was already in the kitchen preparing bread dough. She took one look at Eliza's wrapped hands and said, Let me see. They're fine. They're not fine. Sit down. Eliza sat. Mrs. Garrett unwrapped the cloth and examined the damage with clinical efficiency. You tore the skin clean through in places. What were you doing? Helping bring the cattle back? In the middle of the night? Mrs. Garrett's eyebrows rose. And Cade let you? I didn't give him much choice. Clearly. The older woman retrieved a tin of salve from the cupboard. This'll hurt. It did. Eliza bit her lip as Mrs. Garrett cleaned and dressed the wounds properly. By the time she finished, Eliza's hands were wrapped like a boxer's. You won't be doing any detailed work for a few days, Mrs. Garrett said. But you'll heal. You're tougher than you look. People keep saying that like they're surprised. That's because we are. Mrs. Garrett returned the salve to its shelf. Most women who come out here expecting one thing and finding another just break. They cry, they complain, they make everyone miserable until someone sends them home. You haven't done any of that. There's nowhere to send me home to. Plenty of women would find somewhere anyway. Mrs. Garrett studied her. You planning to stay? Eliza looked at her bandaged hands. I don't know what Cade's planning. We haven't discussed it. Maybe you should. The conversation ended when the men came in for breakfast. They ate the food Mrs. Garrett had prepared, their voices loud and cheerful now that the cattle crisis had passed. Tommy was already turning the previous night into a story, embellishing details for dramatic effect. And there's Eliza hanging onto that rope like her life depended on it, Heifer thrashing around trying to kick Cade's head off. It wasn't trying to kick my head off, Cade said mildly. Close enough. Point is, she didn't let go. Hands were bleeding and everything. Sullivan glanced at Eliza's wrapped hands. You should take it easy today. I'm fine. You're injured. There's a difference. Cade set down his coffee. Sullivan's right. No heavy work today. Then what should I do? Help Chen with inventory. It's mostly writing, nothing that'll tear your hands open worse. It wasn't a suggestion. Eliza nodded and finished her breakfast in silence. Chen turned out to be surprisingly talkative once you got him alone. He'd come from San Francisco 5 years ago, following work west when the railroad construction stalled. He was methodical, patient, and had a dry sense of humor that caught Eliza off guard. They spent the morning in the storage barn, counting supplies and recording everything in the ledger. Chen would call out numbers, Eliza would write them down. Simple work, but it needed doing. You surprised everyone, Chen said after a while. So I hear. When you first arrived, Tommy bet you'd be gone within a week. Sullivan gave you 2 weeks. I said a month. What did Cade say? Nothing. He never bets on people. Chen moved to the next shelf. But he watches. He's always watching. Eliza thought about that. She'd noticed it too. The way Cade would observe from a distance, taking in details without comment. It was unnerving sometimes, feeling his attention without understanding what he was looking for. What happened to his wife? She asked. Rebecca. Chen paused. You should ask him that. I'm asking you, he sighed. She got sick in December of '58, started with a cough. By January, it was pneumonia. By February, she was gone. His voice was matter-of-fact, but his hands had stopped moving. Cade worked himself half to death trying to save her. Rode 2 days to get a doctor, paid for medicines they couldn't afford, sat by her bedside every night. None of it mattered. That's terrible. What's terrible is what it did to him after. Chen resumed counting. He stopped talking to people unless it was about work. stopped going into town. The ranch became everything, the only thing that made sense to him. Some of us worried he'd work himself into an early grave. And then he arranged to marry Sienna. Mrs. Garrett's idea, actually. She told him the ranch needed a woman's touch again, that he couldn't run the place alone forever. Took her 2 years to convince him. Chen shot her a look. Then your father sent you instead. My father sent the daughter he could afford to lose. Maybe, but you're still here. They finished the inventory by afternoon. Eliza's hands ached despite the minimal work, but she'd managed. Chen helped her carry the updated ledgers back to the house. Inside, she found Cade at the kitchen table, going through papers with an expression that suggested nothing good. He looked up when she entered. How bad are your hands? Healing. That's not what I asked. Eliza set the ledgers down. They hurt, but I can still work. Cade studied her for a moment, then gestured to the papers. I need your help with something. She sat across from him. The papers were bills, notices, and what looked like loan documents. Her stomach sank as she scanned the numbers. You're in debt, she said quietly. The ranch is in debt. There's a difference. Cade ran a hand through his hair, looking tired. Last year was bad. Lost too many cattle to disease. Grain prices dropped, and I had to borrow to make it through winter. I was counting on this year being better. But then you lost 4 head last night. And before that, I paid for a wife who never showed up. He said it without accusation, just stating fact. The money I sent your father was supposed to cover the rest of what I owed on the north pasture. Now I'm short. Eliza looked at the numbers again, adding them up in her head. How short? $300. It might as well have been $3,000. That kind of money didn't just appear on a struggling ranch. When's the payment due? She asked. End of April. 2 months. Eliza's mind raced through possibilities. Could you sell cattle early? Prices are terrible right now. I'd lose money. Take another loan? Nobody's going to lend to someone who's already behind. Cade gathered the papers into a pile. I'll figure something out. Always do. But he didn't sound convinced. That night, lying in the guest room that still didn't feel like hers, Eliza stared at the ceiling and thought about debts. Her father had sent her here to fulfill a contract he'd already been paid for. In his mind, that made them even. His 23 years of supporting her traded for her marrying a stranger. But Cade had paid for a wife he never received. He was out the money and stuck with a replacement nobody wanted. She owed him, not because of her father's arrangement, but because Cade had let her stay when he could have sent her away. Because he'd given her work, food, shelter, because he'd treated her with more basic decency than her own family ever had. The question was what she could possibly do about it. The answer came 3 days later, in the most unexpected way. Eliza was in the barn helping Tommy muck stalls when she heard unfamiliar voices outside. She looked out to see a wagon approaching. Expensive, well-maintained, pulled by horses that cost more than most people made in a year. Tommy whistled low. That's the Morrison wagon. What's he doing here? Who's Morrison? Richest man in 3 counties. Owns half the land between here and Kansas City. Tommy set down his shovel. This can't be good. They watched as a tall man in his 50s climbed down from the wagon, followed by a woman in an elaborate dress that was completely inappropriate for ranch life. The man had the confident bearing of someone who'd never been told no in his life. Cade emerged from the house, his expression carefully neutral. Morrison, what brings you out here? Business, Mercer. Always business. Morrison glanced around the ranch with an appraising eye. I heard you had some trouble the other night. Lost cattle? We found most of them. But not all. Morrison smiled thinly. Word gets around. I also heard you're carrying significant debt. Cade's jaw tightened. That's my concern. It becomes my concern when I'm considering buying the land adjacent to yours. I like to know who my neighbors are, and whether they'll still be my neighbors in 6 months. The threat was subtle but clear. Morrison was circling, waiting for Cade to fail so he could swoop in and buy the ranch at a fraction of its value. The woman with Morrison had been studying the ranch with obvious disdain, but her attention shifted when Eliza stepped out of the barn. Her eyes widened slightly. My word, she said. Is that Eliza Blackwell? Eliza's stomach dropped. She knew that voice. Mrs. Morrison, I didn't recognize you. Clearly not, given your current state of dress. Mrs. Morrison's gaze swept over Eliza's practical work clothes with thinly veiled horror. I heard rumors you'd come west, but I assumed they were exaggerated. What on earth are you doing here? I live here. Live here? At this ranch? Mrs. Morrison looked between Eliza and Cade, understanding dawning. Oh my. Does your father know you're— My father sent me here, Eliza said evenly. Morrison's interest sharpened. This is Blackwell's daughter? The one who was supposed to marry you? No, Cade said. The one I did marry. The lie came so smoothly that Eliza almost believed it herself. She stared at Cade, shocked, but he didn't look at her. His attention stayed locked on Morrison. You're married? Mrs. Morrison said. When did this happen? 3 weeks ago, Cade said. Small ceremony. Didn't see the need to make a fuss about it. Morrison studied them both, clearly skeptical. Congratulations, though I'm surprised word hasn't spread. We've been busy keeping the ranch running. Cade's tone made it clear the conversation was over. Was there something else you needed? Just neighborly curiosity. Morrison climbed back into his wagon. Though I have to say, Mercer, marriage won't solve your financial problems. If you need to sell, my offer stands. They left in a cloud of dust and presumption. The moment the wagon disappeared, Eliza rounded on Cade. Why did you tell them we're married? Because Morrison is a vulture, and vultures circle wounded prey. Cade headed toward the barn. If he thinks I'm desperate enough to accept charity brides, he'll push harder. But a man with a wife and a functioning household looks stable. So you lied. I protected my interests. He stopped, turning to face her. Would you rather I told him the truth? That you're here temporarily? That this whole arrangement is one bad month away from falling apart? Because that's exactly the kind of information Morrison uses to destroy people. Eliza wanted to argue, but she couldn't. He was right. The Morrisons were exactly the type to spread gossip, and that gossip could hurt Cade's already precarious situation. Fine, she said. But you could have warned me first. There wasn't time. There's always time for the truth. Cade's expression hardened. The truth is messy and complicated, and it doesn't pay bills. Sometimes a simple lie works better. He walked away, leaving Eliza standing alone in the yard. That night at dinner, the tension was thick enough to choke on. The ranch hands noticed but didn't comment. They ate quickly and excused themselves, leaving Eliza and Cade alone at the table. We need to talk about this, Eliza said. There's nothing to talk about. You told people we're married. I told 2 people we're married. There's a difference. 2 people who will tell everyone else in the county. Eliza stood, frustration bubbling over. You can't just announce something like that without discussing it with me first. Why not? You're living in my house, eating my food, working on my ranch. What's the difference between that and marriage? The difference is choice. The difference is honesty. She grabbed her plate and took it to the washing basin. I've spent my whole life having decisions made for me by other people. I thought maybe here it would be different. Cade was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. You're right. I should have asked first. Eliza turned, surprised by the admission. But the situation stands, he continued. Morrison will spread the word that we're married. We can either deny it and look like liars, or we can accept it and use it to our advantage. Use it how? Married men get better credit. Banks trust them more. If I'm going to get an extension on that loan, I need every advantage I can get. Cade met her eyes. I'm not asking you to actually marry me. I'm asking you to let people think we are for a few months, just until I get the ranch stabilized. And then what? Then we tell people it didn't work out. You leave, I pay you for your time here, and we both move on with our lives. It was practical, logical, completely reasonable, and it made Eliza feel like she was being used all over again. I need to think about it, she said. Take your time. Just decide before Sunday. Why Sunday? Because that's when half the county will be at church, and the Morrisons will make sure everyone knows about the wedding they supposedly witnessed. Of course they would. Eliza went to bed that night with her mind churning. Part of her wanted to refuse on principle. She'd been treated like a commodity her entire life, and this felt uncomfortably similar. But another part recognized the cold reality of their situation. Cade needed help, and she owed him for taking her in when he didn't have to. Besides, where else would she go? She fell asleep without reaching a decision. The choice was made for her 2 days later when a letter arrived from St. Louis. Cade brought it to her during breakfast, his expression unreadable. "This came for you." The handwriting on the envelope was her father's. Eliza's hands shook slightly as she opened it. The letter was brief, characteristically cold, and devastating in its implications. "Eliza, I trust you have settled affairs with Mr. Mercer by now, one way or another. Sienna and Thomas are expecting their first child. We are planning an elaborate celebration in July. Do not embarrass the family by returning before then. Your sister does not need reminders of unpleasant subjects during her confinement. Remain in Missouri until I send word otherwise." That was it. No questions about her well-being, no concern for how she was surviving. Just orders to stay away because her presence might upset the favorite daughter. Eliza set the letter down carefully, afraid that if she held it any longer, she might tear it to pieces. "Bad news?" Cade asked. "My father wants me to stay here indefinitely. My sister's pregnant, and apparently I'm too unpleasant to be around during her celebration." She said it lightly, trying to make it sound like it didn't matter, but her voice cracked on the last word. Cade read the letter himself, his jaw tightening. "Your father's a piece of work. He's always been clear about which daughter he valued. That doesn't make it acceptable." Eliza laughed bitterly. "Acceptable or not, it's the situation. I'm stuck here whether you want me or not." "I didn't say I don't want you here." "You didn't say you do either." Cade set the letter aside. "You've worked harder than anyone expected. You've earned your place on this ranch. If you want to stay—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "If you want to stay, we can make it official. Not the pretend marriage for the Morrisons, an actual marriage. Legal paperwork, the whole thing." Eliza stared at him. "You're proposing?" "I'm proposing a practical arrangement." He met her eyes steadily. "You need a place to live. I need help running this ranch. We work well together. It makes sense." That's the least romantic proposal I've ever heard. "I'm not offering romance. I'm offering partnership." "Why?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "What do you mean, why? Why would you tie yourself to me legally? You could just let me stay on as a hired worker." "Because hired workers leave." Cade's voice was firm. "And because you deserve better than being someone's temporary solution." "You want honesty? Here it is. I respected Rebecca, I cared for her, but I'm not looking to replace her. I'm not offering love or affection or any of that. But I can offer you a home, security, and a partnership that means something. That's more than your father ever gave you." It was true, brutally, honestly true. "And if I say no?" Eliza asked. "Then you can stay anyway, and we'll keep pretending for the neighbors. Your choice." Eliza looked at the letter from her father, then at Cade's steady, serious face. She thought about the last 3 weeks, the work, the exhaustion, the small moments of respect earned through blood and sweat. She thought about having nowhere else to go, no family that wanted her, no future waiting back in St. Louis. And she thought about the fact that Cade Mercer was offering her something nobody else ever had, a choice that wasn't really a choice, but felt more honest than anything her father had ever given her. "All right," she said, "I'll marry you." "You're sure?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." Something that might have been approval flickered in Cade's eyes. "We'll go to town on Monday. Make it legal." "What do we tell people?" "The truth. We got married quietly because neither of us wanted a fuss. And the ranch hands? They'll figure it out." They did figure it out, approximately 10 seconds after Cade made the announcement that evening. The men had gathered for dinner, tired and hungry, after a long day fixing the south fence. Cade waited until everyone had food before speaking. "Eliza and I are getting married on Monday." The room went completely silent. Tommy's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Sullivan's eyes widened. Chen looked between them like he was trying to solve a complicated equation. Finally, Tommy said, "Wait, what?" "We're getting married," Cade repeated. "Thought you should know." "When did this happen?" Sullivan asked. "We've been discussing it." "Discussing it? For how long?" "Long enough." Tommy set down his fork. "Boss, I don't mean to question your decisions, but are you sure about this? Would I announce it if I wasn't?" "I mean, no disrespect to Eliza, but you've known her for 3 weeks. 3 weeks ago, you thought she'd be gone by now." 3 weeks ago, I thought a lot of things. Cade's tone made it clear the subject wasn't open for debate. The decision's made. Eliza expected arguments, protests, maybe even outright hostility. Instead, Sullivan started laughing. "What's funny?" Cade demanded. "You are. You've been watching her like a hawk for weeks, noticing every damn thing she does, and now you're acting like this is some cold business decision." Sullivan shook his head. "Whatever helps you sleep at night, boss. It is a business decision." "Sure it is." Chen spoke up quietly. "Congratulations, both of you." "Thanks," Eliza said, finding her voice. The others added their congratulations, some more enthusiastically than others. Tommy still looked skeptical, but he didn't argue further. They finished dinner with the conversation carefully steered towards safer topics like weather and cattle. After the men left, Eliza helped Cade clean up. They worked in silence for several minutes before he spoke. "You didn't have to agree," he said. "I know. You can still change your mind. Can I?" Eliza dried a plate and set it aside. "Because it feels like we've already committed to this path. The men know, the Morrisons know. Changing my mind now would just make everything more complicated. Complicated's better than trapped." "Who says I feel trapped?" Cade looked at her directly. "Do you?" Eliza considered the question honestly. Did she feel trapped? Yes. But she'd felt trapped her entire life, trapped by her father's expectations, by Sienna's shadow, by society's rules about what unmarried women could and couldn't do. At least this trap came with work she was good at, people who respected her efforts, and a man who was honest about his limitations. "I feel like I'm making the best choice available to me," she said finally. "That's different from being trapped." "If you say so." They finished the dishes. Cade went to his room, Eliza to hers, but that night, lying in the darkness, she allowed herself to wonder what she'd just agreed to. Monday came faster than expected. They rode into town together, Eliza on Copper and Cade on his gray gelding. The town was small, one main street with a general store, a church, a post office, and a handful of other businesses. People stopped to stare as they passed. "News travels fast," Cade muttered. The Morrisons kept their promise. The county clerk's office was in a small building next to the post office. Inside, a tired-looking man in his 40s glanced up from his paperwork. "Help you folks?" "We need a marriage license," Cade said. The clerk's eyebrows rose. "You're Cade Mercer, right? Heard you already got married a few weeks back." "Heard wrong. We're doing it now." "Huh. Well, rumors do run wild around here." He pulled out the necessary forms. "I'll need both your names, ages, and places of birth." They provided the information. The clerk filled out the paperwork with methodical slowness, asking occasional questions to verify details. The whole process took less than 30 minutes. "All right," the clerk said finally. "You'll need witnesses to make it official. Got anybody in mind?" Cade looked around the empty office. "Not particularly. I can grab someone from the street if you want." "That'll work." The clerk stepped outside and returned with two people, a middle-aged woman who worked at the general store and an older man Eliza didn't recognize. They agreed to witness, probably more out of curiosity than kindness. The actual ceremony was perfunctory. The clerk read the required words, asked if they consented, and had them sign the paperwork. The witnesses added their signatures. The whole thing took maybe 5 minutes. And just like that, Eliza Blackwell became Eliza Mercer. She stared at her new name on the marriage certificate, still not quite believing it was real. "Congratulations," the clerk said, sounding bored. "That'll be $2 for the license." Cade paid. They walked outside into the cold afternoon sun. "Well," Eliza said, "that happened." "Yeah." "Do you feel any different?" "No. You?" "Not really." They stood there awkwardly for a moment, neither sure what to do next. Finally, Cade cleared his throat. "We should get supplies while we're in town. Make the trip worthwhile." They spent the next hour at the general store purchasing flour, coffee, and other necessities. The woman who'd witnessed their marriage was working the counter, and she couldn't stop staring. "So you're the new Mrs. Mercer," she said while tallying their purchases. "Apparently. Heard all kinds of stories about you. They say you're the sister who got sent instead of the pretty one." Eliza's spine stiffened, but Cade spoke before she could respond. "The pretty one married someone else," he said flatly. I got the one who can actually work. Seems like I made out better in the deal." The woman had the grace to look embarrassed. They loaded the supplies onto the horses and started the ride back. Halfway home, Cade spoke suddenly. "I meant what I said back there." "About what?" "About making out better." He kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "Sienna might have been beautiful, but I don't need beautiful. I need someone who won't quit when things get hard." "That's all this is to you? Someone who won't quit?" "That's not nothing. Most people quit." Eliza thought about that. She'd spent years being compared to Sienna and found wanting, but Cade was comparing them by different standards entirely. Not beauty or charm, but endurance and competence. It shouldn't have mattered what he thought. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. But it mattered anyway. They reached the ranch as evening fell. The men were already finishing their day's work, and they greeted Eliza with nods of acknowledgement. Not congratulations, not celebration, just acceptance that the situation had changed and life would continue. That night, Eliza moved her belongings from the guest room to what had been Rebecca's room. Cade's room was at the opposite end of the hall, and he made no suggestion that the arrangement should be different. They were married on paper, but the reality remained practical, distant, safe. She unpacked her few possessions and arranged them carefully in drawers that still smelled faintly of lavender. Rebecca's clothes had been removed, but her presence lingered in the way the furniture was arranged, in the worn spot on the floor near the window where she must have stood countless mornings. Eliza wondered what Rebecca would think of her replacement. Would she approve? Pity her? Laugh at the absurdity of it all? A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Cade entered carrying something wrapped in cloth. "Found this in the attic. Thought you might want it." He unwrapped it to reveal a simple gold ring. "It was Rebecca's," he said. "If you don't want to wear it, I understand, but people will expect to see a ring." Eliza took it carefully. The gold was worn smooth, warm to the touch. "Are you sure?" She would have wanted it used. She hated waste. Eliza slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. She looked at Cade, unsure what to say. He just nodded. "Good night, Eliza." "Good night." He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Eliza looked at the ring on her finger, catching the lamplight. She was married to a man who didn't love her, living in a dead woman's room, wearing a dead woman's ring. She should feel sad or scared or angry. Instead, she felt something stranger. She felt like maybe, for the first time in her life, she'd found a place where survival was enough, where being useful mattered more than being wanted, where she could build something that belonged to her, even if it wasn't what she'd imagined. Outside her window, the Missouri plains stretched endlessly into darkness. Somewhere out there, her father was planning celebrations for Sienna's baby. Somewhere, the Morrisons were spreading gossip. Somewhere, Morrison himself was probably still plotting to take Cade's land. But here, in this room, wearing this ring, Eliza felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt ready to fight for what was hers. That readiness to fight was tested sooner than she expected. Spring arrived in fits and starts, the Missouri weather unable to decide between freezing rain and muddy warmth. Eliza had been married to Cade for 2 weeks when the first real trouble showed up, dressed in silk and fury. She was in the barn helping Tommy repair a damaged saddle when she heard the sound of an approaching carriage. Not a wagon or a simple buggy, but a genuine carriage with polished wood and brass fittings that caught the morning sun. "Who the hell is that?" Tommy asked, standing to get a better look. Eliza walked to the barn entrance and felt her stomach drop. She recognized that carriage. She'd seen it dozens of times in St. Louis, parked outside the best houses, carrying the most important people. The door opened and Sienna Blackwell stepped out. Except she wasn't Sienna Blackwell anymore. She was Sienna Wickham now, married to Thomas, and living the life their father had always wanted for her. She wore a traveling dress that probably cost more than the ranch made in a month, and her dark hair was arranged in elaborate curls that must have taken her maid hours to perfect. She looked exactly like the photographs Cade had received. Beautiful, confident, every inch the woman he'd been promised. "Oh no," Eliza whispered. "You know her?" Tommy asked. "That's my sister." Tommy's eyes widened. "The one who was supposed to marry Cade?" "Yes." Sienna spotted Eliza and her perfectly painted lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Eliza, how rustic you look." Cade emerged from the house, his expression turning to stone when he saw the carriage. Sullivan and Chen appeared from different corners of the ranch, drawn by the commotion. "Miss Blackwell," Cade said, his voice carefully neutral. "This is unexpected." "Mrs. Wickham," Sienna corrected. "I've been married for 2 months now, though I suppose you know that, given the circumstances." Her gaze swept over the ranch with obvious distaste. "Is there somewhere we can speak privately?" "Anything you need to say can be said here. I'd rather not conduct business in front of your hired help." "They're not hired help. They're part of this ranch, and they stay." Sienna's jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure. A man stepped out of the carriage behind her. Late 30s, expensive suit, carrying a leather case that screamed lawyer. "This is Mr. Bradford," Sienna said. "My attorney. We're here to discuss the matter of your marriage to my sister." "There's nothing to discuss," Cade said. "We're legally married. The paperwork's filed. Under false pretenses." Bradford opened his case and withdrew documents. Miss Blackwell, Mrs. Wickham, was the intended bride in the original agreement. The contract specified her explicitly. When her father substituted another woman without your knowledge or consent, that constituted fraud. "I consented when I married Eliza, after being deceived about the nature of the arrangement." Bradford's voice was smooth, practiced. "We have evidence that you paid substantial money for a specific bride and received a completely different woman. Any reasonable court would consider that grounds for annulment." Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. Annulment meant the marriage never existed. It meant she'd be back where she started, unwanted, homeless, with nowhere to go. Cade's expression didn't change. "What's your interest in this, Mrs. Wickham? You're married to someone else. This arrangement doesn't affect you." "It affects my family's reputation," Sienna said coldly. "Your dissatisfaction with the arrangement has become public gossip. People are saying my father cheated you, that he sent you inferior goods." Her eyes flicked to Eliza. "I won't have my family name dragged through the mud because my sister couldn't manage to be adequate." The insult landed like a physical blow. Eliza had heard variations of it her entire life, but hearing it said in front of Cade and the ranch hands made it exponentially worse. Tommy made a sound of protest, but Sullivan put a hand on his arm to quiet him. "Your family's reputation isn't my problem," Cade said. "And this marriage stands. Be reasonable, Mr. Mercer." Bradford pulled out more papers. "We're prepared to offer compensation. Full return of the money you paid, plus an additional sum for your trouble. All we ask is that you sign the annulment papers and allow this unfortunate situation to be resolved quietly." "How much compensation?" Chen asked from where he stood near the fence. Bradford named a figure that made Tommy whistle softly. It was more than enough to cover Cade's debts and still have money left over for improvements. Eliza watched Cade's face, trying to read his thoughts. This was the perfect solution to his financial problems. He could get rid of the wife he never wanted, pay off his loans, and start fresh. There was no logical reason to refuse. "No," Cade said. Sienna's composure cracked. "Excuse me? I said no. The marriage stands. Take your money and your lawyer and get off my property." "You're being absurd. Look at her." Sienna gestured at Eliza with undisguised contempt. "She's plain. She's common. She has no accomplishments of value. I'm offering you a way out of a bad situation and enough money to solve your problems. Why would you possibly refuse?" "Because she's my wife," Cade said simply. "And I don't trade people for money." "You don't understand what you're turning down." Bradford's professional veneer was starting to crack. "Mrs. Wickham is prepared to be very generous, more generous than someone in your financial position has any right to expect." "My financial position is my business." "Your financial position is about to become everyone's business when Morrison calls in your debts and takes this ranch." Sienna's voice had turned sharp, mean. "You think I don't know what's happening here? You're drowning, Mr. Mercer, and you're refusing a lifeline because of some misplaced sense of honor regarding a woman nobody wanted in the first place." "Get out," Cade said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "I'm not leaving until—" "I said get out, now, before I have my men physically remove you." Sullivan stepped forward, followed by Tommy and Chen. None of them looked particularly friendly. Bradford gathered his papers quickly. "This is a mistake, Mr. Mercer. We're prepared to pursue this matter legally." "Then pursue it, but do it somewhere else." Sienna stared at Cade, then at Eliza. her expression twisting with something that looked like genuine confusion. "Why?" she asked, directing the question at her sister. "Why would he choose you over money he desperately needs?" Eliza found her voice, though it came out shakier than she wanted. "Maybe because I actually work. Maybe because I don't spend my time tearing other people down to make myself feel important. Or maybe," she paused, gathering courage, "maybe because he sees something in me that you never could. The ability to be useful instead of ornamental." Sienna's face flushed with anger. "You'll regret this, both of you. When this ranch fails and you're left with nothing, remember that I offered you a way out." She climbed back into the carriage. Bradford followed, and the driver snapped the reins. They pulled away in a cloud of dust and wounded pride. The moment they were out of sight, Eliza's legs nearly gave out. She grabbed the fence post to steady herself. "You all right?" Tommy asked. "Fine. I'm fine." "That was your sister?" He shook his head. "Jesus. No wonder your dad sent you instead." "Tommy," Sullivan said warningly. "What?" "I'm just saying, if that's what passes for beautiful in St. Louis, I'll stick with plain women who actually know how to work." It was probably meant as a compliment, but it still stung. Eliza excused herself and headed toward the house, needing space to process what had just happened. Cade caught up with her before she reached the door. "Eliza." She stopped but didn't turn around. "You should have taken the money." "I didn't want the money." "You need the money. Your ranch is in trouble, and they were offering enough to solve everything." "Not everything." He moved around to face her. "You heard what she said. She wanted the marriage annulled. That means you'd have nowhere to go." "I'd figure something out." "Would you?" "Because from where I'm standing, you'd be back in St. Louis living with a father who hates you and a sister who treats you like dirt." Cade's voice was firm. "I told you this was a partnership. That means I don't throw you away the moment something better comes along." "Why not? Everyone else does." The words came out more bitter than she intended. Cade studied her face for a long moment. "Not everyone," he said quietly, "and not me." He left her standing there, those words echoing in her head. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay in Rebecca's bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Sienna's visit over and over. The contempt in her sister's voice, the casual cruelty of being called inferior goods, the shock of watching Cade refuse money he desperately needed just to keep her around. She should feel grateful. She did feel grateful, but gratitude was tangled up with something more complicated. The realization that she'd tied her entire future to a man she barely knew, a man whose financial situation was apparently worse than she'd understood. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and went downstairs to make tea. She found Cade already in the kitchen, papers spread across the table, working by lamplight. "Can't sleep either?" he asked without looking up. "No. Tea's still hot if you want some." She poured herself a cup and sat across from him. The papers were financial records, bills, calculations scrawled in margins. The numbers didn't look good. "How bad is it really?" she asked. Cade set down his pencil. "Bad enough that Morrison wasn't wrong. If I can't make the payment by end of April, he'll have grounds to force a sale." "How much do you need?" $347. "And how much do you have?" "About 90. If I sell some equipment we barely use anyway." Eliza did the math in her head. "That leaves you $257 short." "Yes." "What happens if you can't pay?" "Morrison buys the ranch at auction for probably half what it's worth. I lose everything Rebecca and I built. The men lose their jobs." He looked at her directly. "And you lose your home." "It's not really my home, though, is it? I've been here a month. It's as much your home as it is mine. You work here, you live here, you've bled for this place." Cade gathered the papers into a pile. "That makes it yours." Eliza wrapped her hands around the warm cup, thinking, there has to be a way to get that money. "I've been through every option. The cattle aren't ready to sell, grain prices are terrible, and nobody's lending to someone already in debt." "What about selling land?" "I'd lose the best grazing pasture. Might as well sell the whole ranch at that point." They sat in silence for several minutes, both staring at problems neither could solve. Finally, Eliza spoke. "I have some jewelry. Not much, but my mother left me a few pieces. Maybe they're worth something." Cade looked at her. "I'm not taking your mother's jewelry." "Why not?" "It's just sitting in my trunk doing nothing." "Because it's yours. The only thing your family gave you that actually matters." "My family gave me nothing that matters. This ranch matters." The work here matters. She met his eyes. You matter. The last part slipped out before she could stop it. Cade's expression shifted, something unreadable crossing his face. We'll figure something out, he said after a moment, without selling your jewelry. But no, that's final. Eliza wanted to argue, but she recognized the tone. The discussion was over. She finished her tea and went back to bed, still unable to sleep, but feeling slightly less alone in her worry. The next morning brought new problems. Eliza was feeding the chickens when Sullivan came running from the north pasture, his face tight with anger. Someone cut the fence, he said when Cade emerged from the barn. Deliberate, clean cuts, not weather damage. How many head got out? Can't tell yet. We're still counting. They rode out together, Cade, Sullivan, Tommy, Chen, and Eliza. The damage was obvious once they reached the site. Someone had used wire cutters to create a gap large enough for cattle to wander through. This wasn't an accident, Chen said, examining the cuts. Someone knew what they were doing. Cade's jaw was tight. How long ago? Hard to say. Could have been last night, could have been early this morning. They spent the next 3 hours tracking down cattle. By the time they returned, they'd recovered most of them, but 6 were still missing. This is Morrison, Tommy said as they repaired the fence. Has to be. He wants you to fail. Morrison's too smart to get his hands dirty directly, Sullivan said, but he's got plenty of people willing to do his dirty work. Or it could be Vernon, Chen suggested quietly. Everyone stopped working. Vernon Hayes was one of the ranch hands who'd quit 2 weeks earlier after Cade had called him out for showing up drunk. He'd left angry, making vague threats that nobody had taken seriously. Vernon's mean, but he's not smart enough for something like this, Tommy said. Doesn't take brains to cut a fence, Sullivan countered. Cade finished hammering the last post. Doesn't matter who did it. What matters is making sure it doesn't happen again. We'll start running night patrols, 2 men, rotating shifts. Everyone pulls their weight. That night, Eliza insisted on taking a shift with Sullivan. Cade argued against it, but she stood firm. I can ride well enough now. I can handle a rifle. And you need everyone you've got. It could be dangerous. Everything here is dangerous. I'm doing it. So she found herself riding the fence line at 2 a.m, rifle across her saddle, with Sullivan keeping pace beside her. The Missouri night was eerily quiet, just wind and distant animal sounds. You didn't have to volunteer for this, Sullivan said after a while. Yes, I did. Most women wouldn't. I'm tired of people telling me what most women would or wouldn't do. Eliza adjusted her grip on the reins. I'm here. I'm part of this ranch. That means I pull my weight same as everyone else. Sullivan chuckled. You're stubborn. So I've been told. They rode in companionable silence for another hour before Sullivan spoke again. Can I ask you something personal? Depends on the question. Why'd you marry him? Really? Sullivan glanced at her. Not the practical reasons. The real reason. Eliza considered the question carefully. Because he didn't send me away when he could have. Because he gave me work instead of pity. Because... She paused, searching for the right words. Because, for the first time in my life, someone saw me as useful instead of burdensome. That mattered more than love or romance or any of that. That's a lonely reason to marry someone. Maybe, but it's honest. They completed the patrol without incident, but the pattern continued for the next week. Every few days, something would go wrong. A gate left open that everyone swore they'd latched. Tools gone missing. A water trough deliberately contaminated with salt. The men were exhausted from the extra patrols and constant vigilance. Tempers ran short. Tommy and Sullivan got into a shouting match over something trivial. Chen stopped talking almost entirely. And through it all, the April deadline crept closer. Eliza watched Cade grow more withdrawn, more tense. He worked longer hours, slept less, barely ate. She tried to help where she could, taking over the bookkeeping completely, managing the household, freeing him to focus on keeping the ranch operational. But she could see the weight crushing him. 2 weeks before the payment was due, Mrs. Garrett pulled Eliza aside after breakfast. He's going to break, the older woman said bluntly. I've seen it before. Men push themselves until there's nothing left, and then they just stop. What am I supposed to do about it? You're his wife. Make him rest. Make him eat. Make him remember he's human. He barely talks to me about anything that isn't ranch business. Then make him talk about something else. Mrs. Garrett fixed her with a hard stare. Or lose him to his own stubbornness. That night, Eliza knocked on Cade's bedroom door. He opened it, looking exhausted, still fully dressed despite the late hour. "Something wrong?" he asked. "Yes, you're killing yourself." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're running on no sleep and barely eating. When's the last time you had a full meal?" "I don't have time for—" "Make time." Eliza pushed past him into the room. "Sit down." Eliza, "Sit down." Surprised by her firmness, he sat on the edge of the bed. Eliza pulled the chair from his desk and sat facing him. "Talk to me," she said. "About what?" "Anything. Everything. I don't care. Just stop carrying this alone." Cade was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly, he started talking. He told her about building the ranch with Rebecca, about the first winter when they'd nearly starved, about the year the drought killed half their cattle. He told her about watching Rebecca die and feeling helpless, about the guilt of moving on, about the fear of losing everything they'd built together. Eliza listened without interrupting, watching the exhaustion and fear and grief pour out of him. "I can't lose this place," he said finally, his voice rough. "It's all I have left of her. All I have left of the person I used to be before everything went to hell." "It's not all you have," Eliza said quietly. "You have the men. They respect you. You have Mrs. Garrett, who cares about you even when you're being stubborn. And you have me. For now." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means this marriage was never supposed to be permanent. It was a solution to immediate problems. Once those problems go away..." He stopped himself. "Once those problems go away, what? You think I'll leave?" Eliza leaned forward. "Cade, I have nowhere else to go. No family that wants me, no money, no prospects. But more than that, I don't want to leave. This place matters to me. The work here matters. You..." She hesitated. "You matter." It was the second time she'd said it, and this time she meant it even more. Cade looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "I don't understand you." "What's to understand? You could have left a dozen times. You could have taken Sienna's offer and gone back to St. Louis. You could have demanded I treat this like a real marriage with real affection. Instead, you just stay. You work. You don't complain. Why?" "Because I'm tired of being the woman nobody chose," Eliza said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "I spent 23 years being unwanted. Here, I might not be wanted, but I'm needed. That's better than anything I had before." "You're wrong," Cade said quietly. "About what?" "About not being wanted." The words hung in the air between them. Eliza's breath caught. Before either of them could say anything else, a gunshot cracked through the night. They ran outside to find chaos. The barn was on fire, flames already climbing the wooden walls. The men were shouting, trying to get the horses out before the smoke killed them. "Get water!" Cade yelled, running toward the well. Eliza grabbed buckets and joined the desperate effort to save the barn. The heat was intense, the smoke choking. They formed a line passing buckets, throwing water on flames that seemed to grow faster than they could fight them. Tommy led the last horse out, coughing violently. "That's all of them." "Let it burn then," Sullivan said. "Focus on keeping it from spreading to the other buildings." They worked for 2 hours, until the barn was a smoking ruin, but the rest of the ranch was safe. Everyone was covered in soot, exhausted, eyes burning from smoke. Chen found it first, the oil-soaked rags near where the fire had started. "This was set deliberately," he said, holding up the evidence. Cade stared at the destroyed barn, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and walked toward the bunkhouse without a word. Eliza followed him. "Cade, don't. You can't just..." "I said don't." He spun to face her and she saw the cracks finally showing. The exhaustion, the fear, the overwhelming weight of too many problems with no solutions. "The barn's gone. That's another $1,000 I don't have. The payment's due in 10 days and I'm further behind than I was yesterday. Someone's actively trying to destroy this place and I can't stop them. So please, just don't." "What do you want me to do?" "I don't know." His voice cracked slightly. "I don't know anymore." Eliza stepped closer. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. It was the first time they'd touched deliberately, the first real physical connection in their entire marriage. We'll figure it out, she said. Together. How? How are we going to figure this out? I don't know yet, but giving up isn't an option. Cade looked at their joined hands, then at her face. For a moment, something in his expression softened. Then Sullivan called out, "Boss, you need to see this." They found him standing near the fence with Tommy and Chen. Vernon Hayes was tied to a post, unconscious, with Chen's rifle pointed at him. Found him trying to run, Chen explained. He smells like kerosene. Cade walked up to Vernon and slapped him awake. The man's eyes opened, focusing slowly. "You burned my barn," Cade said, his voice deadly calm. Vernon laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. "Morrison paid me good money to make your life hell. Said if I could push you into defaulting, he'd give me work after he bought the place." "Morrison put you up to all of it? The fence cutting, the contaminated water, everything?" "All of it. And it worked, didn't it? You're ruined." Cade hit him. Once, hard enough that Vernon's head snapped back. "Tommy, ride into town and get the sheriff," Cade said, his voice still eerily calm. "We're pressing charges. Sullivan, keep him tied up until the law gets here." They secured Vernon and waited for dawn. When the sheriff finally arrived, he took Vernon into custody with promises of a full investigation. "This'll hurt Morrison's reputation," the sheriff said. "Criminal conspiracy, destruction of property. He might try to claim he knew nothing about it, but Vernon's not smart enough to keep his mouth shut." It was small comfort. After everyone left, Eliza found Cade standing in front of the burned barn, staring at the damage. "At least we know who it was," she offered. "Doesn't change the fact that it happened. Doesn't rebuild the barn. Doesn't pay the debt." Eliza was quiet for a moment. Then she made a decision. "Wait here," she said. She ran to the house and up to her room. From the bottom of her trunk, she pulled out a small wooden box. Inside were the few pieces of jewelry her mother had left her: a pair of pearl earrings, a simple gold bracelet, and a ruby ring that had been in her mother's family for 3 generations. She brought the box downstairs and placed it in Cade's hands. "What's this?" he asked. "My mother's jewelry. Take it into town and sell it. It should be worth enough to cover what you're short." "I told you I won't take this. And I'm telling you I don't care what you want anymore. This ranch matters. You matter. And I'm not watching everything fall apart because you're too proud to accept help." "Eliza, I spent my whole life holding on to things that were supposed to matter because they were mine. That jewelry, my mother's memory, my family name. None of it did me any good. None of it made me happy or safe or wanted." She pushed the box firmly into his chest. "But this place does. You do. So take the jewelry, sell it, save the ranch. That's what matters now." Cade looked at the box, then at her. "This is all you have left of her." "No. I have the fact that she gave birth to me even though it killed her. I have the knowledge that someone loved me enough to die for me. That's what I have of her. The jewelry is just metal and stones." "If I do this, when you do this," Eliza corrected. "When I do this," Cade continued, "we're partners. Equal partners. The ranch is as much yours as mine. Legally, in writing, everything's split down the middle." "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do. If you're giving up the only valuable things you own to save this place, then you own part of it. That's non-negotiable." Eliza felt tears pricking her eyes. All right. He left for town that afternoon. When he returned the next day, he had enough money to make the payment with a little left over. He also had papers from a lawyer making Eliza a legal co-owner of the ranch. The payment was made with 3 days to spare. Morrison's face when he received it was apparently worth witnessing, according to the bank clerk who later told Mrs. Garrett, who told Eliza over tea. Vernon was convicted and sentenced to 6 months in jail. Morrison claimed total ignorance of his employees' actions, but the scandal damaged his reputation enough that people stopped trusting him blindly. The ranch survived, but something else had changed too, something harder to name. Cade started talking to Eliza more, not just about work, but about everything. They'd sit on the porch after dinner, watching the sun set, and he'd tell her about his childhood in Kentucky, about his years in California, about the dreams he'd had for this place. And Eliza would tell him about growing up in Sienna's shadow, about her mother's death, about feeling invisible her entire life until she came to Missouri. The physical distance between them began to close. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in small ways. His hand on her shoulder when she did good work, her fingers brushing his when passing tools. standing closer during conversations. The men noticed. Mrs. Garrett definitely noticed. "About time," Sullivan muttered one day when he saw Cade help Eliza down from her horse with unnecessary care. 3 months after arriving in Missouri as the unwanted replacement bride, Eliza Mercer stood on the porch of a ranch she co-owned, watching her husband work in the distance, and realized something that should have terrified her. She was in love with him. It was inconvenient, possibly foolish, and definitely not part of their practical arrangement, but it was true, and she had no idea what to do about it. The realization sat in Eliza's chest like a stone for 3 days before she worked up the courage to do anything about it. The problem was she had no idea what doing anything about it actually meant. Their marriage was a business arrangement, carefully maintained at arm's length despite the growing warmth between them. Confessing feelings would shatter that careful balance, and she wasn't sure either of them was ready for the consequences. So she kept working, kept the secret buried, and tried not to notice how her heart jumped every time Cade walked into a room. Mrs. Garrett noticed anyway. "You're quieter than usual," the older woman observed while they were preparing bread for the week. "Something on your mind?" "Just tired." "Tired people yawn. You're thinking so hard I can practically hear it." Mrs. Garrett punched down the dough with practiced efficiency. "Does this have anything to do with the way you've been watching Cade lately?" Eliza's hand stilled. "I don't know what you mean." "Child, I've been alive 62 years. I know what a woman in love looks like." The words hung in the kitchen air. Eliza wanted to deny them, but her mouth wouldn't cooperate. "It's complicated," she said finally. "Love usually is. It's more than that. We agreed this was a practical arrangement. He married me because he needed help, not because he wanted a wife. And what do you think has changed in the last 4 months?" Mrs. Garrett started shaping loaves. "That man looks at you like you're the only thing keeping him upright. Maybe it started practical, but it's not that way anymore." "You don't know that." "I know he turned down enough money to solve all his problems rather than let you go. I know he made you equal owner of this ranch. I know he spends every evening sitting with you on that porch when he used to work until he collapsed." Mrs. Garrett looked at her directly. "Those aren't the actions of a man who sees you as a business partner." "Then what are they?" "That's something you need to ask him." Before Eliza could respond, Tommy burst through the door, his face flushed with excitement. "Eliza, there's a letter for you. Came with the supply wagon." He handed her an envelope with her father's handwriting. Her stomach dropped. "Thank you, Tommy." She waited until he left before opening it. Mrs. Garrett watched with concern as Eliza read, her face going pale. The letter was brief and brutal in its efficiency. "Eliza, I have learned of your marriage to Mr. Mercer and the arrangement you have made. This does not absolve you of your obligation to stay away until after Sienna's celebration in July. However, I require you to return to St. Louis in August for a family matter of some importance. This is not a request. Be prepared to travel at that time. No explanation of what the family matter was. No acknowledgement of her life in Missouri. Just orders, same as always." "Bad news?" Mrs. Garrett asked gently. "My father wants me back in St. Louis in August. No explanation why." "Are you going to go?" Eliza stared at the letter, anger building in her chest. For months she'd been building a life here. She owned part of this ranch. She had work that mattered, people who respected her, and feelings for a man who might actually care about her in return. And her father thought he could just summon her back like she was still his property. "No," she said, crumpling the letter. "I'm not going," Mrs. Garrett smiled. "Good. About time you told that man where to put his orders." That evening, Eliza sat on the porch with Cade, watching the sun paint the sky orange and red. She'd brought the letter with her, still crumpled in her pocket, trying to decide whether to mention it. "You're quiet tonight," Cade observed. "Just thinking." "About?" She pulled out the letter and handed it to him. He read it quickly, his expression darkening. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "Tell him no." Cade looked surprised. "You're sure?" "I'm not leaving. This is my home now." She paused. "Unless you want me to go." "Why would I want that?" "I don't know. Maybe you're tired of having me around. Maybe the arrangement isn't working the way you thought it would." Cade set the letter aside and turned to face her directly. "Eliza, if I wanted you gone, I would have sent you away months ago. I've had plenty of opportunities." Then why do we still sleep in separate rooms? Why do we barely touch each other? Why does this marriage still feel like a business arrangement when everyone else seems to think it's something more? The questions spilled out before she could stop them. Cade went very still. What do you want it to be? He asked quietly. I asked first. That's not an answer. Eliza took a breath, gathering courage. I want it to be real. I want to stop pretending this is just about convenience and survival. I want... She stopped, the vulnerability too much. What do you want? Cade's voice was gentle, but insistent. I want you to want me. Not just need me or respect me or appreciate my work. I want you to actually want me here. The words hung between them. Cade didn't respond immediately, and Eliza felt her heart sink. She'd said too much, revealed too much, pushed too hard. Then he reached over and took her hand. The same gesture she'd made the night of the fire, but this time deliberate, meaningful. I do want you here, he said. I have for weeks. Maybe longer. He looked down at their joined hands. But I didn't think you felt the same way. You've been so focused on proving yourself, on earning your place. I thought maybe you were just making the best of a bad situation. Is that what you think this is? A bad situation? No, but I thought you might. Cade's thumb traced circles on her palm. You were sent here against your will, married to a stranger, thrown into a life you didn't choose. I figured the best I could offer was respect and partnership. I didn't think you'd want anything more from someone like me. Someone like you? A broken-down rancher with more debts than prospects. A man who's already failed one wife. You didn't fail Rebecca. She got sick. I couldn't save her. That's not the same thing as failing her. Eliza squeezed his hand. And you're not broken down. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. Cade looked at her with an expression she'd never seen before. Hope mixed with fear, vulnerability breaking through his usual reserve. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. The practical arrangement made sense, but this, he gestured between them. This is different, scarier. For me too. What if I'm not good at it? At what? Being someone's husband, actually caring about someone again. What if I mess it up? Eliza moved closer until their shoulders touched. Then we mess it up together. That's what partners do. Cade smiled slightly. When did you get so brave? About the same time you stopped being so stubborn. He laughed, a real laugh that transformed his entire face. Then, slowly, he leaned in and kissed her. It was tentative at first, testing, both of them unsure. But then Eliza responded, and the kiss deepened, 4 months of restrained feeling finally finding release. When they pulled apart, Cade rested his forehead against hers. I'm moving your things to my room, he said. Is that a request or an order? Does it matter? Not really. I was planning to do it anyway. They sat together as the sun finished setting, hands still joined, the distance between them finally closed. Inside the bunkhouse, Tommy saw them through the window and grinned. About damn time, he muttered. Sullivan looked over. What? Boss finally kissed his wife. Took him long enough. Sullivan returned to his card game. I was starting to think they'd both die of stubbornness first. The next morning, Eliza woke in Cade's room, in Cade's bed, with Cade's arm around her waist. Sunlight streamed through the window, and for the first time in her life, she felt exactly where she belonged. She tried to slip out quietly, but Cade pulled her back. Where are you going? To start breakfast. The men will be hungry. Let them wait 5 more minutes. She settled back against him, savoring the warmth and closeness. We're going to scandalize Mrs. Garrett. Mrs. Garrett's been trying to get us together for months. She'll be thrilled. What about the men? They've been taking bets on when this would happen. Sullivan's probably collecting his winnings right now. Eliza laughed. They bet on us? Tommy said 2 months. Chen said 3. Sullivan said it would take until summer because we're both too stubborn for our own good. Who won? Sullivan, technically. It's been 4 months. They lay together in comfortable silence for a few more minutes before Eliza finally forced herself up. She had work to do, and lying in bed wouldn't get it done, no matter how appealing the alternative. Breakfast was chaotic as usual, the men eating quickly and talking loudly about the day's work. But Eliza noticed the glances, the small smiles, the way Tommy elbowed Chen and whispered something that made the quieter man grin. Something you want to say? Cade asked them. Nope. Tommy said innocently. Nothing at all. Liar. Fine. We're just happy you finally pulled your head out of your... Tommy, Sullivan warned. Out of your stubbornness, Tommy finished. It was painful watching you two dance around each other. We weren't dancing, Eliza said. You were definitely dancing. Worst dancing I've ever seen, but still dancing. Cade threw a biscuit at him. Tommy caught it and took a bite, grinning. The teasing continued throughout breakfast, but it was good-natured, affectionate even. These men had become something like family, and they were genuinely happy for both of them. After the men left for their work, Mrs. Garrett arrived and immediately noticed Eliza's slightly different demeanor. Well, she said, a knowing smile on her face. About time. Does everyone keep saying that? Because it's true. Mrs. Garrett started pulling out ingredients for the day's baking. I was beginning to think you'd both be too proud to admit your feelings until you were 90. We're not proud, just cautious. Cautiousness is well and good, but sometimes you have to take a risk. She handed Eliza a mixing bowl. Love's always a risk. The question is whether it's worth taking. And is it? Ask me again in 50 years. They worked together in comfortable silence, preparing food and discussing plans for the week. Mrs. Garrett mentioned that Morrison had been unusually quiet since Vernon's arrest, which everyone agreed was suspicious. Man like that doesn't just accept defeat, Mrs. Garrett said. He's planning something. Let him plan. We survived everything else. Surviving and thriving are different things. You've survived. Now you need to make this ranch actually profitable. She was right. They'd made the payment and kept the land, but they were still operating on thin margins. One bad season could put them right back where they started. That afternoon, Eliza was in the office going over the books when she noticed something odd. The numbers didn't quite add up. Not in a dramatic way, but enough to catch her attention. She checked again, triple-checking her math. They were short about $30 from what should have been in the account based on recent cattle sales. Eliza found Cade in the barn, repairing a harness. Did you take money out of the ranch account recently? She asked. No. Why? We're short about $30. I've checked the numbers 3 times. Cade's expression hardened. Let me see the books. They went through everything together. The discrepancy was definitely there, but there was no clear explanation for where the money had gone. Could it be a bank error? Eliza suggested. Maybe, but I don't like coincidences. Cade closed the ledger. I'll ride into town tomorrow and talk to the bank clerk. I'm coming with you. You don't have to. I'm the one who found the problem. I'm coming. They rode into town the next morning, both tense. The bank was small, run by a nervous man named Peterson who'd always been respectful to Cade. But when they asked about the missing money, Peterson's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, not meeting their eyes. $30 went missing from my account, Cade said. I want to know where it went. Perhaps you're mistaken about the amount. We're not mistaken. Eliza pulled out the ledger. We've checked multiple times. The money was there, now it's not. Peterson wiped sweat from his forehead. I'd have to check our records. Then check them. He disappeared into the back room. They waited, tension building. When Peterson returned, he looked even more nervous. There was a withdrawal, he said quietly. Authorized by... He stopped. Authorized by who? Cade demanded. Mr. Morrison. He said you owed him consulting fees for advice on ranch management. The room went very quiet. I never authorized any withdrawal, Cade said, his voice dangerously calm. And I definitely never asked Morrison for advice. He had documentation, signed papers. Show me. Peterson pulled out a document. Eliza looked over Cade's shoulder and saw immediately what had happened. The signature was forged. A decent forgery, but not quite right. This isn't my signature, Cade said. But Mr. Morrison said, I don't care what Morrison said. He forged my signature and stole from my account. Peterson looked like he might faint. I didn't know. He's such a respected member of the community. I didn't think to question. You didn't think at all. Cade grabbed the forged document. I want my money back, today. I don't have the authority to... Then get someone who does. They left the bank with a promise that the money would be returned by the end of the week. Eliza could see Cade's jaw working, fury barely contained. He's not going to stop, she said quietly. Morrison. He'll keep trying to destroy us. I know. So what do we do? Cade was quiet for a long moment. Then his expression hardened with determination. We destroy him first. That evening, Cade called a meeting with all the ranch hands. He explained about the forged signature and the stolen money, watching their faces darken with anger. Morrison's been trying to ruin us for months, Cade said. First through Vernon, now through fraud. He wants this land, and he's willing to break the law to get it. So what's the plan? Tommy asked. We gather evidence. Every shady deal Morrison's made, every corner he's cut, every person he's cheated. We build a case that destroys his reputation so thoroughly that nobody will trust him again. That's going to take time, Sullivan said. Then we take the time. Chen spoke up quietly. I know someone who might help. A man named Liu, who used to work for Morrison. Got fired when he questioned some accounting irregularities. He's been bitter about it. Can you reach him? I'll ride out tomorrow. Over the next 2 weeks, they built their case. Liu provided documentation of Morrison's shady business practices. Other former employees came forward with stories of threats and intimidation. The evidence piled up until they had enough to take to the territorial marshal. But before they could act, disaster struck from an unexpected direction. A letter arrived for Eliza, this time not from her father, but from a lawyer in St. Louis. The news was devastating. Her father had died. Heart failure, sudden and unexpected. The funeral had already happened. Nobody had bothered to inform her in time to attend. Eliza read the letter 3 times, trying to process the information. She should feel something, shouldn't she? Grief, loss, something. But all she felt was a strange numbness. Cade found her sitting on the porch, staring at nothing. What happened? He asked, seeing her face. She handed him the letter. He read it quickly, then sat beside her. I'm sorry, he said. Are you? Because I'm not sure I am. He was still your father. He was never really my father, not in any way that mattered. Eliza crumpled the letter. He spent 23 years making me feel worthless. Why should I mourn him now that he's gone? Because complicated feelings don't just disappear when someone dies. They stick around and make everything harder. She looked at him. Is that what happened with Rebecca? Yes. I loved her, but I was also angry at her for dying and leaving me alone. Took me years to admit that. He put his arm around her. You're allowed to feel however you feel. There's no right way to grieve someone who hurt you. Eliza leaned against him, letting his warmth steady her. The lawyer says I need to come to St. Louis for the reading of the will. Apparently there are matters that require my presence. When? 2 weeks. Do you want to go? No, but I probably should. Then we'll both go. She looked up at him, surprised. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do. You're my wife. Where you go, I go. But the ranch? Sullivan can manage things for a week. The ranch will survive. They left for St. Louis 10 days later, leaving Sullivan in charge and taking enough supplies for the journey. Eliza hadn't been back to the city since her father had shipped her off to Missouri, and approaching it now felt surreal. The city was exactly as she remembered, crowded, noisy, full of people who looked right through her. But she'd changed. The woman who'd left here 5 months ago had been beaten down, uncertain, desperate for scraps of acceptance. The woman returning was different, stronger, sure of herself in ways she'd never been before. They stayed at a modest hotel. The reading of the will was scheduled for the following afternoon at the lawyer's office. That night, lying in an unfamiliar bed, Eliza couldn't sleep. Cade noticed her restlessness. Talk to me, he said. I'm scared. Of what? Of seeing Sienna, of facing everything I left behind, of finding out my father left me nothing because he still hated me, even in death. Cade pulled her closer. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together, and then we go home. Home, Eliza repeated. The word felt right. Missouri was home now. The ranch, the work, the life she'd built there. That was home in a way St. Louis never had been. The next afternoon, they arrived at the lawyer's office to find Sienna already there, dressed in elaborate mourning clothes and looking appropriately devastated. Her husband Thomas stood beside her, looking uncomfortable. Sienna's eyes widened when she saw Eliza. You actually came, she said. I was summoned. I came. Looking like that? Sienna's gaze swept over Eliza's simple traveling dress with obvious disdain. You've gone completely native. I've gone completely happy, Eliza corrected. There's a difference. The lawyer, a thin man named Pemberton, cleared his throat. If we're all here, we can begin. They sat. Pemberton opened a document and began reading the will in a droning voice. Most of it was expected. The house and majority of assets went to Sienna. Various smaller bequests to servants and business associates. Then Pemberton reached the section about Eliza. To my daughter Eliza, I leave the sum of $500 to be paid immediately upon my death. Eliza's breath caught. $500 was more money than she'd ever expected to see. Additionally, Pemberton continued, I leave her the property located at 412 Maple Street, currently occupied by tenants. What? Sienna shot to her feet. That property is worth at least $3,000. According to the will is wrong. Father wouldn't have left her anything valuable. She was nothing to him. Nevertheless, these are his wishes as stated in the legal document. Sienna's face flushed with rage. This is ridiculous. She doesn't deserve any of this. She abandoned the family, married some dirt farmer in Missouri, and now she gets rewarded for it? I didn't abandon anyone, Eliza said quietly. Father sent me away because he couldn't stand looking at me. That's not true. It is true. You know it is. Eliza stood to face her sister. He spent 23 years punishing me for surviving when Mother didn't, but even he apparently felt enough guilt to leave me something in his will. Guilt? This is... Sienna stopped, breathing hard. You don't even need it. You have that ranch. The ranch barely makes enough to survive. This money could actually help us build something stable. Then sell the property to me. I'll give you a fair price. No. The word came out firm, final. Sienna stared at her. What do you mean, no? I mean, I'm keeping it. I'll sell it eventually, but to someone other than you. You spiteful little... Sienna, Thomas said quietly, putting a hand on his wife's arm. This isn't the place. Don't tell me what to do. She shook off his hand and stormed out of the office. Thomas gave Eliza an apologetic look before following. Pemberton gathered his papers. I'll have the funds transferred to your account, Mrs. Mercer. The property deed will be ready for you to collect tomorrow. Thank you. Outside, Cade took her hand. $500, that's enough to rebuild the barn, Eliza finished. Plus buy new equipment, maybe even hire another hand. And the property? We sell it, add the money to the ranch, make real improvements. Cade stopped walking and pulled her into an embrace right there on the street, not caring who saw. I love you, he said. The words were simple, unadorned, but they hit Eliza with the force of revelation. She pulled back to look at him. What did you say? I love you. Should have said it weeks ago, but I was too scared. But standing here watching you face down your sister and claim what's yours, I can't keep it in anymore. He cupped her face in his hands. I love you, Eliza Mercer. Not because you're convenient or useful or any of that practical nonsense, because you're brave and stubborn and you make me want to be better than I am. Eliza felt tears streaming down her face. I love you too. They kissed right there on the St. Louis street, while proper society walked past and pretended not to notice. That night, they celebrated in their hotel room, talking about plans for the ranch, for their future together. Eliza felt lighter than she had in days, the weight of her father's death somehow less oppressive now that she knew he'd acknowledged her in the end. Do you think he regretted it? She asked Cade. The way he treated me. Maybe. Or maybe he just wanted to ease his conscience before dying. Does it matter which? Not really. He's gone. What matters is what you do with what he left you. We, Eliza corrected, what we do with it. We, Cade agreed. They left St. Louis 2 days later with the deed to the property and a bank draft for $500. The return journey felt different than the arrival, like they were leaving the past behind and heading toward something better. When the ranch came into view, Eliza felt her heart lift. She'd been gone less than 2 weeks, but it felt like coming home after years away. Sullivan met them at the fence. Everything all right? Better than all right, Cade said. We've got money to rebuild. The barn? And then some. They filled the men in over dinner, explaining about the inheritance and the property. Tommy whooped with excitement at the news of the barn rebuild. Chen smiled quietly. Sullivan just nodded, satisfied. So what's first? Tommy asked. First, we rebuild the barn, Cade said. Then we expand the herd. Maybe add a few more horses. By next spring, this ranch should be turning real profit. About damn time, Sullivan said. They started work the next week. With the extra money, they could afford better lumber, hire temporary workers to speed the construction, and actually build something that would last. Eliza worked alongside the men, her hands roughening again from the labor. But this time it felt different. This time, she was building something that was partially hers, something that represented not just survival, but actual success. Morrison tried one last desperate move, spreading rumors about the legitimacy of Eliza's inheritance. But by then, they'd already shared their evidence of his fraud with the territorial marshal. The investigation into his business practices became public knowledge, and his reputation crumbled faster than anyone expected. Within 2 months, Morrison was forced to sell most of his holdings to cover his debts and legal fees. The man who'd tried to destroy them ended up destroying himself instead. The barn was finished by late summer. It stood tall and solid, a testament to what they'd survived and overcome. At the dedication, such as it was, the whole crew gathered to admire their work. Not bad, Sullivan said. Not bad? Tommy protested. It's the best barn in the county. Don't let it go to your head. They bickered good-naturedly while Eliza stood beside Cade, his arm around her waist, both of them looking at what they'd built together. We did it, she said quietly. We did. What's next? Cade looked down at her, love clear in his eyes. Whatever we want. Together. That night, Eliza stood in the bedroom she shared with Cade, looking at Rebecca's ring on her finger. For months, she'd worn it as a symbol of practicality, of business arrangement, of survival. But now it meant something else entirely. It meant partnership. Love. A future built on more than just necessity. She heard Cade's footsteps on the stairs and smiled. The unwanted daughter had found her place. The replacement bride had become irreplaceable. The woman nobody chose had chosen herself and built something that nobody could take away. And as Cade entered the room and pulled her into his arms, Eliza knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. That sense of belonging lasted exactly 3 weeks before the past came knocking one final time. Eliza was in the kitchen preserving vegetables for winter when Mrs. Garrett arrived with unusual news. A telegram had come from St. Louis, and the contents made the older woman's face tight with concern. It's from your sister, Mrs. Garrett said, handing over the small paper. Eliza wiped her hands and read it twice, disbelief mounting with each word. Father's business partner claims ownership of Maple Street property. Legal challenge filed. Your presence required immediately to contest. Come alone or lose everything. Sienna. Damn it, Eliza whispered. What is it? Someone's trying to take the property Father left me. They're saying it wasn't his to give. She crumpled the telegram. And Sienna wants me to come back to St. Louis to fight it. Alone? That's what she said. Kate appeared in the doorway, drawn by the tension in her voice. What's wrong? Eliza showed him the telegram. His jaw tightened as he read. We leave tomorrow, he said. She said, come alone. I don't care what she said. You're not facing this by yourself. Cade, the ranch, will survive a week without us. Sullivan's more than capable. He took her hands. We've built something good here, Eliza. I'm not letting anyone take it away because of some legal challenge we don't even understand yet. They rode out the next morning, pushing hard to make St. Louis in 4 days instead of 5. The urgency ate at Eliza's nerves. $3,000 was at stake. Money that could transform the ranch from barely surviving to genuinely thriving. Losing it would hurt, not just financially, but emotionally. It felt like her father was reaching from beyond the grave to punish her one last time. When they arrived at Sienna's house, a massive Victorian mansion that screamed Thomas Wickham's wealth, a servant showed them to the parlor where Sienna waited. She looked tired, thinner than before, and there was something in her eyes that Eliza had never seen before. Uncertainty. You brought him anyway, Sienna said, looking at Cade with obvious displeasure. He's my husband. Where I go, he goes. This is family business. He's family now. Either tell us what's happening or we leave. Sienna's composure cracked slightly. She gestured to chairs, and they sat. Father had a business partner named Harold Sutton, she began. They jointly owned several properties around the city, including the one on Maple Street. The partnership agreement stated that if one partner died, the surviving partner inherited the deceased partner's share. But father left that property to me in his will, Eliza said. Sutton claims the partnership agreement supersedes the will. He's filed a legal challenge saying the property was never father's alone to give away. Is he right? Kate asked. I don't know. The lawyers are still arguing about it. Sienna twisted her hands together. But there's more. Sutton is demanding that if the property reverts to him, I compensate him for the $500 father left you, claiming it should have come from jointly owned funds. So he's trying to take both the property and make you pay me back? Yes. Eliza studied her sister's face. Why do you care? You didn't want me to have any of it anyway. Because it's the principle. Sienna's voice rose. Sutton is a snake who's been trying to cheat our family for years. If he wins this, he'll go after other assets. The house, father's investments, everything. She took a shaky breath. And because as much as I hate to admit it, you're right. Father did owe you something. Taking it away now feels wrong. It was the closest thing to an apology Eliza had ever heard from her sister. When's the hearing? Kate asked. 3 days. But there's a problem. Sienna looked directly at Eliza. Sutton's lawyers are going to argue that you abandoned the family, that you showed no interest in father's affairs or business, and therefore have no legitimate claim to any inheritance. They'll say father was senile when he wrote the will, that you manipulated him. I hadn't seen father in months when he died. How could I have manipulated him? Facts don't matter to lawyers. They'll build whatever story serves their purpose. So what do we do? Eliza asked. We fight, together. Sienna met her eyes. I have documentation of father's business dealings with Sutton. Letters proving father wanted to dissolve the partnership before he died because he'd discovered Sutton was embezzling. If we can prove Sutton is corrupt, his claim to the property falls apart. And you're willing to help me with this? I'm willing to help destroy Sutton. Whether it helps you is just a convenient side effect. It wasn't warm or sisterly, but it was honest. Eliza could work with honest. Over the next 3 days, they prepared. Sienna's lawyer, a sharp woman named Catherine Morris, who'd made her reputation defending widows against corrupt business partners, reviewed all the documentation. The case was complicated, tangled in partnership agreements and property law, but Morris seemed confident. Sutton's made mistakes, she explained the night before the hearing. He's been sloppy covering his embezzlement. If I can get him on the stand and push hard enough, he'll crack. And if he doesn't? Eliza asked. Then we lose the property and Sutton walks away richer. That's the reality. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She paced the guest room in Sienna's house while Cade watched from the bed. Come here, he said finally. She crawled beside him, and he pulled her close. What are you thinking? He asked. That I'm tired of fighting for scraps. Tired of people trying to take away anything good that happens to me. She pressed her face against his chest. Why can't anything just be easy? Because easy doesn't build character. It doesn't make you stronger. I don't want to be stronger. I want to be happy. You're happy. This is just a temporary problem. Is it? Because it feels like there's always going to be something. Some new crisis. Some new person trying to destroy what we've built. Cade was quiet for a moment. You're right. There probably will be. That's life. One problem after another, with occasional breaks to catch your breath. He tilted her face up to look at him. But we handle them together. That's what makes it bearable. What if we lose tomorrow? Then we go home, rebuild with what we have, and keep going. The property would have helped, but it's not everything. We've survived worse. He was right, but that didn't make the fear go away. The courthouse the next morning was packed. Apparently the case had attracted attention. Wealthy businessmen accused of embezzlement by his dead partner's daughters made good gossip. Eliza sat beside Sienna at the plaintiff's table, both of them dressed in their best, presenting a united front despite their complicated history. Sutton sat across the aisle, a portly man in his 60s with calculating eyes and an expensive suit. His lawyers looked confident, which made Eliza's stomach churn. The judge, a severe woman named Harrison, who looked like she suffered fools poorly, called the court to order. The legal arguments were dense, technical, boring. Sutton's lawyers argued about partnership agreements and property law. Catherine Morris countered with evidence of embezzlement and fraud. Back and forth, citing precedents and statutes that meant nothing to Eliza. Then Morris called Sutton to the stand. "Mr. Sutton, how long were you in business with Elijah Blackwell?" 23 years. "And during that time, did Mr. Blackwell ever express concerns about your handling of partnership finances?" "Occasionally we disagreed about investments, but nothing serious." "Nothing serious?" Morris pulled out a letter. "This is dated 6 months before Mr. Blackwell's death. In it, he accuses you of misappropriating partnership funds. Would you call that nothing serious?" Sutton's confidence flickered. Elijah was mistaken. There were accounting errors, nothing more. "Accounting errors totaling $17,000? I can explain." "Please do. Explain to the court how $17,000 in accounting errors happened under your supervision." Sutton stumbled through an explanation that convinced nobody. Morris pressed harder, pulling out more letters, more documentation. Each piece of evidence made Sutton look worse, not just incompetent, but deliberately fraudulent. By the time Morris finished with him, Sutton was sweating and his lawyers looked worried. Then Sienna took the stand. She testified about discovering her father's concerns, about finding hidden correspondence detailing Sutton's embezzlement, about her father's intention to dissolve the partnership before his death. "Your father left property to your sister despite years of estrangement," Sutton's lawyer said during cross-examination. "Doesn't that strike you as odd?" "No, it strikes me as guilt." Sienna's voice was clear, firm. "My father treated Eliza terribly for 23 years. The property was his way of acknowledging that. Taking it from her now doesn't honor his wishes. It just compounds the original injustice." It was the most supportive thing Sienna had ever said about her. Eliza felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the beginning of understanding. When Eliza's turn came, she was terrified, but Catherine Morris kept the question simple. "Did you ever ask your father for this property?" "No." "Did you even know about it before his death?" "No." "Did you have any contact with your father in the months before he died?" "No, he'd ordered me to stay away." "So how could you have manipulated him into including you in his will?" "I couldn't have." Morris turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the defense's entire case rests on the premise that my client somehow coerced a man she hadn't seen in months into leaving her property. Meanwhile, the evidence clearly shows that Mr. Sutton was embezzling from his partnership with Mr. Blackwell and now seeks to profit further from his former partner's death. The will is clear. The property was Mr. Blackwell's to give, and my client has every right to inherit it." The judge took a brief recess to consider. Those 30 minutes felt like hours. Eliza sat beside Cade, gripping his hand so tightly her knuckles went white. When Judge Harrison returned, her expression revealed nothing. "I've reviewed the evidence and arguments presented," she began. "While partnership agreements do generally supersede individual ownership claims, the evidence of fraud and embezzlement by Mr. Sutton fundamentally undermines his position. A partner engaged in criminal activity forfeits certain rights within that partnership." Sutton's face went pale. "Furthermore," Harrison continued, "the will is legally sound and clearly expresses Mr. Blackwell's intentions. Therefore, I rule in favor of the plaintiff. The property at 412 Maple Street belongs to Mrs. Eliza Mercer. Mr. Sutton's claim is denied." The gavel came down. Eliza sat frozen, trying to process what had just happened. They'd won. The property was hers. The money was safe. Beside her, Sienna exhaled shakily. "Thank God." Catherine Morris was already gathering papers, looking satisfied. "I'll file the additional paperwork to ensure Sutton can't appeal. But this is essentially over." Outside the courthouse, away from the crowds and lawyers, Sienna stopped them. "I owe you an apology," she said to Eliza. "For what specifically? There's a lot to choose from." Sienna smiled slightly. "Fair. For all of it, I suppose, for treating you like you were less than me, for going along with father's cruelty, for showing up at your ranch and trying to ruin your marriage. Why did you do all that?" "Because I was jealous." Sienna looked away. "You got out. You escaped father's control, built a life that was actually yours. Meanwhile, I stayed and married the man father chose and became exactly what he wanted me to be. And I hated you for having the courage I didn't." It was the most honest Sienna had ever been with her. "What about now?" Eliza asked. "Are you happy with Thomas?" "I'm learning to be." He's kinder than I deserve. Sienna met her eyes. For what it's worth, I saw how your husband looks at you. That's real. Hold on to that. I intend to. They didn't embrace, they weren't there yet, and might never be. But Sienna extended her hand and Eliza shook it. A truce, if not forgiveness. A beginning of something different. Before leaving St. Louis, Eliza made one final stop. Her father's grave was in a well-maintained cemetery on the city's west side. She stood looking at the headstone, Cade a silent presence beside her. I don't know what to feel, she admitted. Part of me is angry. Part of me is sad. Mostly, I just feel empty. You don't have to feel anything specific. There's no right way to mourn someone who hurt you. Eliza knelt and placed a single flower on the grave. Not out of love, but out of closure. You spent my whole life making me feel worthless, she said quietly to the stone. But you were wrong. I'm not worthless. I'm not a mistake. I'm not the wrong daughter. She stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. I'm exactly who I was always meant to be. And I'm happy. I wish you'd been able to see that. She turned away from the grave and didn't look back. The journey home to Missouri felt different than any previous trip. They rode with lighter hearts, the weight of old pain finally beginning to lift. The property sale would take a few weeks to finalize, but Morris had found a buyer willing to pay fair market value. Combined with what they'd already received, the total would be enough to transform the ranch completely. When they crested the final hill and saw the ranch spread out below them, Eliza felt her throat tighten with emotion. The new barn stood proud against the sky. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney. In the distance, she could see cattle grazing and men working. Home. This was home in a way St. Louis never had been. Sullivan met them at the fence, looking relieved. About time. Tommy's been driving me crazy asking when you'd be back. How bad was it? Kate asked. Not bad. Chen kept everyone in line, but the boy missed his favorite person to argue with. They rode in together, and the men gathered to welcome them back. Tommy was indeed excited to see Eliza, immediately launching into a story about a calf birth that had gone surprisingly well, considering his limited experience. That night, at dinner, Eliza told them about the court case and the successful outcome. The men cheered, already making plans for how to spend the money. New breeding stock, Sullivan suggested. Better equipment, Chen added. A proper bunkhouse that doesn't leak when it rains, Tommy said, earning agreement from everyone. Cade raised his hand for quiet. All good ideas? We'll discuss it properly tomorrow. Tonight, we celebrate. Mrs. Garrett had prepared a feast, her way of welcoming them home and celebrating the victory. They ate and drank and talked late into the night, the bunkhouse full of warmth and laughter. Later, lying in bed beside Cade, Eliza stared at the ceiling and thought about everything that had happened since that freezing February day when she'd first arrived. What are you thinking about? Cade asked. How different everything is now. 7 months ago, I was the unwanted daughter being shipped off like cargo. Now I'm a ranch owner planning expansion strategies. You've earned it, every bit of it. Have I? She turned to face him. Sometimes I still feel like that scared woman stepping off the wagon, expecting to be rejected. You're allowed to feel that way sometimes, doesn't make it true. Cade brushed hair from her face. You know what I see when I look at you? What? Someone who faced every challenge thrown at her and refused to break. Someone who turned a bad situation into something good. Someone who made me believe in second chances. He kissed her forehead. You're the strongest person I know. I'm not that strong. I'm just stubborn. Sometimes that's the same thing. They fell asleep wrapped around each other, comfortable in a way that had taken months to build but now felt natural as breathing. The next few weeks were spent planning the ranch's expansion. With Eliza's inheritance, they could finally do things right. They purchased 20 head of quality breeding cattle. They hired 2 additional ranch hands, carefully vetted to avoid another Vernon situation. They expanded the pastures and built a proper bunkhouse that didn't leak. The ranch transformed from barely surviving to genuinely prospering. But the most significant change came from an unexpected conversation one evening in October. Mrs. Garrett was teaching Eliza to make preserves when she said casually, "You know what this ranch needs?" "What's that?" "Children." Eliza nearly dropped the jar she was holding. "What?" "Children. Young voices. Life beyond just work." Mrs. Garrett didn't look up from her stirring. This place was built for a family. Right now, it's just a business. There's a difference. Kate and I haven't discussed children. Then maybe you should. That night, Eliza brought it up tentatively. Cade's reaction surprised her. I've been thinking about it too, he admitted. This ranch is doing well now. We're stable. And I keep thinking about what comes next, what we're building this for. Are you saying you want children? I'm saying I want a future that includes them. With you. He took her hand. But only if you want that too. Eliza thought about it. 6 months ago, she couldn't have imagined wanting children. She'd barely been surviving herself. But now, looking at the life they'd built, the stability they'd achieved, she found herself warming to the idea. I think I do, she said slowly. Not immediately, but someday. Someday works for me. 3 months later, in the middle of January's bitter cold, Eliza realized she was pregnant. She told Cade on a Sunday morning, watching his face transform from confusion to shock to pure joy. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing like she'd never heard him laugh before. We're having a baby, he said, wonder in his voice. We're having a baby, she confirmed. The news spread through the ranch like wildfire. The men were protective immediately, trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work. She argued against it initially, but by her 4th month she had to admit they might have a point. Mrs. Garrett became unbearable in her helpfulness, constantly bringing food and advice and old baby clothes she'd saved from somewhere. But beneath the fussing was genuine affection, and Eliza found herself grateful for it. The pregnancy wasn't easy. She was sick constantly in the early months, exhausted in the middle ones, uncomfortable in the final stretch. But through it all, Cade was there, steady, supportive, handling her mood swings with patience she didn't always deserve. I'm being horrible, she said one evening in her 8th month after snapping at him over something trivial. You're growing a human. You're allowed to be horrible. That's a low bar. I have low standards. He rubbed her swollen feet, which had become a nightly ritual. Besides, you're not horrible. You're just uncomfortable. I'm enormous. You're beautiful. You're a liar. I'm honest. You've never been more beautiful to me than you are right now. She wanted to argue, but the sincerity in his voice stopped her. He really meant it. Somehow, this stubborn rancher who'd married her out of necessity had fallen completely in love with her, and she with him. Their daughter was born in late August, arriving after 16 hours of labor that left Eliza exhausted and Cade traumatized. But when they placed the baby in her arms, tiny, red-faced, screaming her displeasure at the world, Eliza felt something shift fundamentally inside her. This was her daughter. Her family, her future. They named her Rebecca Rose Mercer. Rebecca for the woman whose kindness had made the ranch a home. Rose for Eliza's mother, who died giving life just as Rebecca had died preserving it. Cade held his daughter with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. She's perfect. She's wrinkled and angry. Perfect, he insisted. The men were equally smitten. Tommy couldn't stop grinning every time he saw the baby. Sullivan carved a cradle with his own hands. Chen gave her a jade pendant for luck, a family heirloom he claimed his mother would have wanted passed on. Mrs. Garrett cried when she first held Rebecca, muttering something about new beginnings and second chances. Even Sienna sent a gift, an expensive silver rattle with a note that simply said, "Congratulations. She's lucky to have you as her mother." It wasn't much, but it was progress. As autumn turned to winter, Eliza settled into motherhood with the same determination she'd applied to everything else. It was exhausting, messy, and harder than any ranch work she'd ever done. But it was also filled with moments of profound joy. Rebecca's first smile, her tiny hand gripping Eliza's finger, the weight of her sleeping against Eliza's chest. One evening, with Rebecca finally asleep in her cradle, Eliza stood on the porch watching the sun set over the ranch. Cade joined her, slipping his arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything. How different my life is now compared to a year and a half ago." "Better or worse?" "Infinitely better." She leaned against him. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real, that I went from being the unwanted daughter to owning a thriving ranch with a husband who loves me and a daughter who's perfect. She gets the perfect part from you. She gets the stubborn part from both of us." Cade laughed. "True." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sky fade from orange to purple. In the distance, they could hear the men finishing evening chores, their voices carrying on the wind. The ranch was alive with purpose, with people who'd become family, with a future that stretched out bright and promising. "Do you ever regret it?" Eliza asked quietly. "Keeping me instead of sending me back that first day?" Cade turned her to face him. "Never. Not once. Not even for a second. Even though I wasn't what you ordered? Especially because you weren't what I ordered. I asked for someone competent and got someone extraordinary instead." He cupped her face in his hands. "You were never the wrong woman, Eliza. You were always exactly who I needed, even before I knew I needed you." She kissed him, pouring a year and a half of love and gratitude and hope into it. When they pulled apart, Cade rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you." "For what?" "For being brave enough to stay. For fighting when it would have been easier to give up. For building this life with me." "I should be thanking you. You gave me everything I never knew I wanted." "Then we're even." Inside the house, Rebecca started crying, hungry again, probably, or just wanting attention. Eliza went to get her, lifting their daughter from the cradle and settling into the rocking chair to nurse. Cade watched from the doorway, his expression soft with contentment. This was their life now, not perfect, not without challenges, but fundamentally good. Built on honesty, hard work, and love that had grown from necessity into something genuine and lasting. Eliza had spent 23 years being told she wasn't enough. Not pretty enough, not charming enough, not valuable enough to be anyone's first choice. But she'd been wrong. They'd all been wrong. She wasn't the wrong woman. She was exactly the right woman for this life, this ranch, this family. And as she sat in the Missouri darkness, nursing her daughter while her husband watched with love in his eyes, Eliza Mercer finally understood something fundamental about worth. It wasn't something other people gave you. It wasn't determined by beauty or birth order or who chose you first. Worth was built through action, through perseverance, through refusing to accept other people's low opinions of you. She'd built her worth with blistered hands and stubborn determination. She'd earned every bit of happiness she now held. And nobody, not her father, not Sienna, not Morrison, not anyone, could ever take that away. Outside, the Missouri wind swept across the plains, carrying the promise of another harsh winter. But inside the ranch house, surrounded by warmth and love and family, Eliza wasn't afraid of what was coming. She'd survived worse, and she'd keep surviving, keep building, keep proving that the unwanted daughter had become the strongest woman on the frontier. Not because she had to, but because she chose to. And that made all the difference.